Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3101, Myriad Spirit City. The use of the metal token was to control the energy vortex. Before Zen pulled it out, the Sanskrit words orbiting it emitted a red light. Zen immediately came to the conclusion that the red light indicated Elvinia's existence as the purified being. When the token sensed the presence of a purified being stepping into the energy vortex, its mechanisms would be triggered to activate. The following reaction would be so vicious that it would cause the purified being to instantly perish inside the energy vortex. Although Zen had managed to extend the energy vortex to a considerable degree, there was still a chance of him facing an assault if he left the iron house to enter the channel. Because of that, it was in his best interest to pick it up and take it with him. Upon reaching the lower floor of the iron house, Zen prepared to move past the darkness to leave the house. Before he could make his way out, he heard a familiar voice call out to him from behind. "Wait, stop," Elvinia demanded as she stopped in her tracks. "What's wrong?" Zen asked, looking back, seemingly confused by her sudden change of mind. Her eyes were barren of all emotions, as they screamed of murderous intents. "The element spirit civilization is too powerful. We can't afford to offend them. They won't let us go that easily, as we've taken too many things." As she spoke, her fingers glowed visibly as a light began to gather at her fingertips. The monsters behind the iron bars of the cages became aware of her intentions for them. They shrunk themselves to a corner as they trembled in fear. The shape-shifting spirit pleaded pitifully, "Please, I beg of you. Spare us. I've told you everything I know, just don't kill us." However, Elvinia stood with an unfaltering resolve. She showed no signs of going back on her decision. Just as the blazing white light slowly became more violent amidst the darkness, Zen quickly acted up and grabbed a hold of her arm. "Stop it, Elvinia, let them go." Elvinia glanced at Zen with questioning eyes reflecting complicated emotions. She turned away and said in a low voice, "Don't blame me for being cold-blooded. You know the consequences of letting them go." She was aware of Zen's tendency to feel sympathetic towards others and treat them with leniency. However, she didn't expect him to stop her in this situation. "No, you have my word. My lips are sealed. I won't utter a word to anyone," the shape-shifting spirit begged as it screamed with its voice filled with sincerity to gain Zen's favor. It even went as far as to morph into a human girl and got on its knees to plead with both hands clasped near its chest. At this sight, Zen couldn't help but let out a loud sigh. Even if the spirit kept its word and didn't expose them, its master would still have various means of obtaining information from its memory. He turned his gaze towards the monsters and asked, "You have been confined for so long. Have you ever thought of escaping?" "Escape?" The shape-shifting spirit switched its gaze between Zen and the cage and spoke with low spirits. "We can't leave the darkness." More than half of the iron house remained cloaked in darkness, which was similar to the environment of the dark region. The shape-shifting spirit and the monsters trapped in cages were living creatures of the dark region. Their adaptive nature towards the dark and their poor resistance against the light were obvious. "Then how did you get trapped in here?" Zen asked, seemingly confused. "We were brought here in a box." "There must be a black box," replied the shape-shifting spirit. As soon as he heard it talk about a black box, a recollection of encountering that object transmitted in Zen's mind. The furrows on his brows relaxed as the past confusion now cleared up. "I see." After he finished his words, he turned around and climbed back up on the upper floor and took down a black box stationed at the corner of the wall. He had overlooked the black box before. The body-strengthening jades had directed his complete attention towards them, causing him to disregard it. Curious as he was, he began to explore to uncover what was so special about this object. The bottom of this black box seemed to have nothing out of the ordinary. However, as Zen reached to discover what was inside it, he found an independent dark region lying dormant underneath the box. "Is this what you were talking about?" Zen asked. "Yes, this is it." Realizing its days of being trapped were about to end, the shape-shifting spirit couldn't help but give in to its emotions and felt thrilled. During its rush of excitement, it forgot it had morphed itself into a naked human woman and even made provocative postures. Zen's eyes widened before he looked away instantly and scowled in an annoyed tone, transform back immediately. After the shape-shifting spirit switched back to its original shape, Zen broke the iron cages as though they were insignificant planks of wood. The initial appearances of those monsters were intimidating, but they weren't violent in the slightest way. It also helped ease the tension amongst them after they communicated with the shape-shifting spirit. One by one, the monsters walked out of their respective iron cages without uttering a word before getting into the black box in Zen's hands. After storing the black box securely into Elvinia's Sumeru space, the pair advanced to the small door in front of them. Zen was the first to walk out of the door. Soon after, a cracking sound echoed in the distance as the dazzling thunder wings appeared on his back and fluttered gracefully before spreading wide. Shortly after, Elvinia walked out of the door and rushed into his embrace, holding onto him tightly. The original channel of the energy vortex had expanded 7 to 8 times. As a result, it was far more spacious. The restless energy bands were rendered useless as they had no effect at all. Elvinia could fly leisurely between them without a hitch by using the cloud flying wheel if she wanted. However, she didn't intend on it. She'd rather remain in Zen's arms and let him escort her to their destination. Silently, she curled up in his embrace and held onto him tightly. Flying on the broad and quiet channel was as easy and simple as walking on the ground for Zen. He maneuvered himself with ease, and within less than half a minute, Zen had rushed out of the energy channel and fell on the stone platform. As he flew, he left behind a series of electric light that fluttered in the air before it disappeared. Princess Elvinia. Princess Elvinia has finally returned. What a relief. Seeing Elvinia descend with the safe embrace of Zen, the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace who awaited their return quickly surrounded them. At the sight of Elvinia and Zen so close to each other, Hyam instinctively glanced at Dorothy, who stood beside him. She watched them with empty eyes as she clenched her fists and bit her lip. Unlike the others, she stood rooted to the ground. Curious as they were, the senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief also huddled around Elvinia and began throwing numerous questions her way, pestering her. Not wanting to explain, Elvinia brushed past them after saying a few cold words. The senior disciples could do nothing but bear with Elvinia's cold treatment of them. They had heard of many tales regarding Thad and his strength, and now they finally had the opportunity to see him up close. They were looking forward to meeting with Thad and Elvinia the most. The Lust World and the Desire World were worlds apart. The battles that took place in the Desire World were far more violent. However, this time, the Oneness Sky Palace weren't just going to encounter the super forces but also the powerful forces belonging to the other shore. It didn't matter whether it was Thad or Elvinia, it was clear both of them would prove to be a great help to the Oneness Sky Palace. After all the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace gathered, they were led out of the stone platform by the senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief, and they headed towards the depths of Stage 14. Although they were both situated on the other shore, the Lust World and the Desire World were notably different from one another. Stage 13 in the Lust World was capable of applying pressure on the souls of light, but that pressure was resistible. However, the purple light curtain hanging in the sky of the Desire World put even more intense pressure onto them. Some of the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace were unable to resist it. Hence, they were forced to constantly consume soul pills after walking a certain distance to support themselves. After a short period of being led by the senior disciples, they passed through a mountain. Their gaze fell upon a huge city placed in front of them, with massive aura emanating from it. Zen had encountered cities before in the Lust World. He had visited the large city of the Abyss Spirit race. However, the number of creatures in the Lust World could not be compared with that of the Desire World. Even their strength was on a league of its own. The city of the Abyss Spirit race was simply not on par with the one in front. Are there living creatures of the other shore in that city? A new disciple asked while giving his shoulders a nervous rub. Of course, this is the Myriad Spirit City. It obviously has creatures of the other shore inside it, and their numbers are immense. But don't worry. As there are many powerful races in this stage, creatures have to follow the rules. As long as they don't act recklessly, we'll be safe, a senior disciple replied to calm the nerves of the anxious disciple. Even the senior disciples were nervous when they stepped into stage 14 for the first time. Chapter 3102, Blackmail. Two giant figures stood at the main entrance of the Myriad Spirit City. The giants were as tall as hills, but their heads were not much larger than a human's. They would have made for a funny sight were it not for their threatening auras. The weapons in their hands were only ordinary-looking, thick wooden clubs, but light constantly flashed through the cracks on them. They were clearly not ordinary weapons. When the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace arrived at the gate, one of the giants shifted the thick wooden club in his hand and blocked the way. The senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief were used to this. One of them walked forward and talked to the two giants politely. He took out some soul pills from his space ring. The cost of entering the Myriad Spirit City was not high, but there were more than 100 disciples, so in sum, it was a large expense. Fortunately, the Oneness Sky Palace would foot the bill. But even after the senior disciple paid the soul pills, the giant refused to open the door. He pointed at Zen and Elvinia with his wooden club. "Those two can't enter." Zen and Elvinia frowned. The giant didn't seem to be highly intelligent and only knew souls. He apparently saw Zen and Elvinia as creatures on the other shore. Even if strictly speaking, they didn't really belong to that classification. "Why?" the senior disciple asked, confused. "You have to pay tenfold soul pills for creatures on the other shore," the giant said. No one from the Oneness Sky Palace had ever come to the Myriad Spirits City with their corporeal bodies before, so even the senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief had no idea about this rule. Tenfold soul pills were not a big amount. Moreover, the Oneness Sky Palace would compensate for the extra soul pills. The senior disciple paid them without hesitation, and even gave another 20,000 soul pills to the two giants as a gift. After receiving the extra soul pills, the two giants grinned contentedly and turned to press their hands on the huge door. Creak, creak, the huge door was pushed open by the two giants. The giants' strength is about 1/200 divine megatons, Zen thought to himself. Such strength was nothing in the source world, but it was still very powerful on the other shore. At the very least, the souls of light would have found it difficult to handle. However, Zen and Elvinia, who was a purified being, should be able to put up a resistance to it. But there would be other powerful creatures in stage 14. After the door was pushed open, a straight and wide path was revealed to everyone, extending ahead of them to the far distance. The buildings in the Myriad Spirits City were of different styles. Some of them were unusually large, while some were small and low. This was really a city where many races dwelt. From time to time, creatures of completely different shapes and appearances passed along the path. Although there were also many races in the source world, they were all born in the same round of chaos and made up of flesh and blood. However, many creatures on the other shore had fled from the past rounds of chaos, like the regal Jade civilization and the Metal civilization. Their forms differed greatly. These creatures were naturally stranger. "Look, what creature is that?" someone asked, pointing at what looked like a hemp rope crawling on the ground. The gray hemp rope was made up of over 1,000 sections. It resembled a snake, but had no head or tail. "This is not just one creature. There are about 1,000 creatures connecting to each other. They are the 1,000-section race," a senior disciple replied. Hearing this, the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace grew curious and surrounded the rope. The rope started trembling before its constituents scattered away, and then gathered together again to form a strange shape. At this, a sudden change came over the senior disciples. One of them quickly came forward, smiling, and spoke to the members of the 1,000-section race in a pacifying voice. After a while, the members of the 1,000-section race scattered again, returned to the rope-like formation, and resumed crawling on the ground. "These creatures won't just attack anyone, but you must be careful with your words and deeds. If you unwittingly provoke them, you will suffer consequences," the senior disciple warned. The creatures had actually been in a battle array just now. Although each of them was only the size of a thumb, when all of them were gathered together, their explosive power was enough to instantly kill the souls of light present. "Understood," the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace replied in unison. They would take care to behave themselves from here on out. These creatures were the same as the Abyss Spirit race in Stage 11. They couldn't afford to offend them. After they had walked along the path for a distance, the disciples were led to another remote path. A senior disciple pointed ahead. "Our stronghold is up ahead," he said. In the horizon, there was a low wooden building, old and shabby in appearance. The disciples felt a little disappointed at the sight. The Oneness Sky Palace seemed to be much weaker in the desire world than it was in the lust world. At least in Stage 4, the Oneness Sky Palace had a lofty temple. It seemed to have nothing in Stage 14. Sensing the disappointment of the disciples, one of the senior disciples sought to appease them. "Stage 14 is just a springboard. The strongest warriors of our Oneness Sky Palace are all in the upper stages. If you are talented and persistent, you won't stay in this stage for long." Zen, unlike the other disciples, wasn't surprised by the situation of the Oneness Sky Palace in Stage 14. The Abyss spirit race dominated Stage 11 and had all the super forces in the Source world under their command. The creatures in the Desire world were stronger and were in larger numbers. Naturally, the Souls of Light didn't have as high a status as them. However, Zen still found it unbelievable just how low the Souls of Light's status here was. As they approached, they saw several creatures walk through another path. These creatures walked upright with 2 feet, but their heads resembled that of insects, their arms as sharp as steel cones. They gathered around the doorway of the wooden building. "Come out and meet us," one of them called out in a sharp voice. At this, several Souls of Light hurried out, led by Abdul. There were usually some disciples guarding the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace. Abdul was usually arrogant and fierce in front of disciples who had just reached the chaotic source realm, but he was very subservient to the insect men. "My friends, what brings you here?" The leader of the insect men scoffed disdainfully, "You are merely Souls of Light. How dare you claim to be the Oneness Sky Palace? That's hilarious, but no matter. When will you give us the 30-finger-sized chunks of soul crystal and 30 jades?" The insect-looking leader demanded. The reason the weak Souls of Light had difficulty establishing a foothold in the Myriad Spirits City was that they were constantly blackmailed like this by these creatures on the other shore. Chapter 3103, Trade Your Life for the Jade. The insect man's request gave Abdul a terrible headache. 30 finger-sized chunks of soul crystal were equivalent to around 30 million soul pills. Even if the body-strengthening jade wasn't considered useful for Souls of Light, it still wasn't cheap and cost around 20 million soul pills. Normally, 50 million soul pills weren't that high of a price for the Oneness Sky Palace, however, the costs added up considering they had paid 5 times over the course of 6 months to a different race each time. "My friends, don't you think you've asked too much from us?" Abdul asked with a frown. The insect man smirked. Without any warning, he raised his right arm from which a pointed cone flew out, brushing past Abdul's side and hitting the wooden building behind him. The round hole left behind by the cone was not a reassuring sight. "This is the price set by Master Ghost Scorpion. Surely you won't dare disobey." This Ghost Scorpion was very notorious in the Myriad Spirits City, often cited as one of the most powerful forces in it. "We've already paid a lot to the city guards this year," Abdul countered. "I don't know what you're talking about. Those guards are entirely different from Master Ghost Scorpion. Bah, I'm wasting my time with you Souls of Light." The insect man spat, raising the sharp cone in his hand. There were rules set in the Myriad Spirits City against fighting, but the Oneness Sky Palace did not have a good foothold in terms of power and influence. It wouldn't be seen as that big of a deal if the tail insect race killed a couple of Souls of Light. Realizing that he was left with no room for negotiation, Abdul was forced to retreat and return to the wooden building. He was able to survive Stage 17 with his strength. But there were not many people in the land of Sword Grief, so the Oneness Sky Palace saw it fit to send some of them to guard this place every once in a while. It was an annoying job. Even though Abdul hated it, he had no choice but to obey what the Oneness Sky Palace told him to do. He collected the necessary amount of soul crystal and body-strengthening jade, reluctantly handing them over to the people of the tail insect race. Abdul couldn't help but feel extremely depressed when he handed over those 30-finger-sized chunks of soul crystal. That amount could have greatly strengthened his Soul of Light. It was understandable that he would be greatly unwilling to give them to other races. Abdul could only watch as the leader of the tail insect race put away the soul crystal and the jade. Master Ghost Scorpion would surely be pleased with them and would naturally give them a small percentage of their earnings. Just as they were about to leave with their haul, the tail insect race turned and spotted the Oneness Sky Palace disciples on the other side of the road. The senior disciples from the land of Sword Grief had a bad feeling about this and chose to lead the new disciples to leave. "Wait, come here, all of you," the insect man screamed. Abdul's heart skipped a beat, worrying whether the people of the tail insect race would pick on the disciples or something. These senior disciples did not dare disobey, choosing to bite the bullet and leading the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace to the entrance of the wooden building. The leader of the tail insect race tutted. "Tisk, tisk. You brought so many dirty souls from the lust world again." According to the belief system of the creatures in the desire world, Souls of Light were dirty beings who continued to corrupt themselves since they did not have the protection of their bodies. They were to be despised according to culture. Of course, this was not taken well by the disciples, especially since they had recently improved to the chaotic source realm. To be considered dirty by these insects was a great offense. Though they did not refute, the disciples trembled with restrained fury. Elvinia herself threw the insect man a murderous look. Their nerve to look down on them was enough for her to consider killing them on the spot. Zen, in contrast, was much calmer. There were always idiots who were ignorant, rude, and arrogant. The correct way to deal with them, as Zen learned, was to just remain calm. Killing them wasn't going to be that much of an issue, but they had to consider the fact that they were newcomers. Causing trouble for the Oneness Sky Palace could have unforeseen circumstances later on, thus, Zen chose to observe rather than act. Each new soul should pay 100,000 soul pills, which means you owe us 10 million in total. As for the body-strengthening jade, you can give me 8 pieces since I'm feeling generous, the insect man demanded with a smug smirk. Abdul couldn't help but gasp. What, is that also an order from Master Ghost Scorpion? The insect man scoffed. It's my order. Why, can't I give out my own orders? Just as Abdul was about to open his mouth to argue, a few disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace couldn't help themselves and burst out. They had long since known that the Desire World was filled with all sorts of trouble, but never to this extent. To see their seniors live in such a way where literal insects bullied them was depressing. Any longing for the Desire World disappeared at that moment. What makes you think we'll give you the soul crystal? Didn't we already pay you a lot? This is blackmail. Is Myriad Spirit's city truly this lawless? The disciples couldn't help but air out their grievances one by one. Abdul and the senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief turned pale and were already thinking up of ways to control this situation. Are you questioning me? The insect man asked. They did not expect such attitudes from the newcomers. Normally, the tail insect race got their way owing largely to their influence and connection to Ghost Scorpion. Let me tell you something. Or rather, he showed them something. In a flash, the insect man raised his sharp cone towards the nearest disciple and attacked. The force was enough to smash the soul of light. Wait. Zen had come forward, with Elvina following closely behind. The sight of these two perplexed the tail insect race. Humans on the other shore were rare, but Elvina seemed to be a real living creature. They hadn't seen one for so many years. Meanwhile, Zen confused them since they couldn't see his appearance clearly. Yet, they could deduce that he entered the other shore with his physical body. That wasn't supposed to happen. However, their strangeness wasn't enough for the tail insect race to treat them seriously. The other shore was filled with creatures strange, powerful, and strong, so this bit of weirdness wasn't as concerning to them as one would think. What are we supposed to be waiting for? In contrast to the disinterested tail insect race, the new disciples, Abdul, and the senior disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace were practically beaming with hope at the sight of Elvina. She had a body. Their only hope now was that she was strong enough to protect them. They still worried a great deal about her since they weren't sure just how powerful she was. Angering a master in the Myriad Spirit City could potentially be bad news to the Oneness Sky Palace. I have the pieces of jade, Zen said, taking out a few and showing them to the members of the tail insect race. Perhaps it was because the two had physical bodies that made the tail insect race slightly more courteous. You should have taken them out a long time ago since you had them. Ha! The insect man let out a hearty laugh and motioned to take the jade away from Zen's hand. Abdul and the others heaved a sigh of relief. This should be enough to buy peace for some time. However, just as the insect man was about to take his earnings, Zen retracted his hand. I didn't say I was going to give them to you for free. He was obviously teasing and the insect man did not appreciate it one bit. What do you mean? Zen tilted his head and smirked. If you want them, pay for them with your life. When he said this, a strong wave of killing intent suddenly burst out from Elvina. Her entire body trembled with raw power as she grabbed the head of one of the insect men. Chapter 3104, A Patron. Even though the members of the tail insect race could react quickly, Elvina launched an attack too suddenly that they could not retaliate. Because of this, the member of the race had no time to react before his head was pulled away from his body by Elvina. Getting a glimpse of the green blood about to gush from the headless body, Elvina tossed it hundreds of feet away. It landed with a solid boom into the wall. She then tossed the head right to the ground like it was nothing. Her eyes were so dark, thirsty for murder. The other members of the tail insect race refused to even look her in the eye. This, Princess Elvina, this, Abdul and the other senior disciples from the Land of Sword Grief could not believe their eyes. On the one hand, when they heard that Elvina had a corporeal body, they immediately knew that she could be a great advantage for the Oneness Sky Palace. However, she had just reached the 14th stage of the other shore realm. According to normal pace, her current strength was not supposed to be this powerful. On the other hand, they all agreed that she shouldn't have gone out of her way to kill the member of the tail insect race. What Abdul feared was not the members of the tail insect race, but the force behind them. Her reckless move could just get them all into trouble. Abdul and others had no clue that Elvina had been holding back for so long. Her sudden course of action might have taken them by surprise, but they were not aware of what went on with her. If she were being reckless, she would have torn all the members of the tail insect race to pieces by now. They had insulted and disrespected the Oneness Sky Palace before, which made her even more angry. She was never one to show mercy, especially to weak creatures she despised. The creatures in the dark region were a prime example, and the tail insect race would have been no exception. If Zen hadn't warned her to restrain her emotions, there was no telling what she would have done already. It was not until they had gone too far that she finally stood her ground. "You, how dare you kill our clansmen?" the leader of the tail insect race hissed, disgusted by what she had just done. He was not expecting a measly human to actually show any signs of resistance, especially like this. Looking at Zen, Elvinia smirked, "I think I want to get rid of more insects." "All right," Zen nodded with a smile. "Just make sure you leave one alive." As soon as he gave the go signal, Elvinia dashed in their direction, leaving streaks of light trailing behind her. At stage 13 of the other shore, there were no suitable clothes for her. Because of this, she was covered in clothing knitted from threads of light. That was why she resembled a shooting star as she ran at full speed. To the crowd, she was a flash of white light. Just then, the heads of the members of the tail insect race crashed into the sky, leaving only headless bodies behind. Within a couple of seconds, the bright light sped through the crowd, leaving only the leader of the tail insect race alive. He looked around, trying to process what had just happened. Just a moment ago, he had planned to fight back, but seeing Elvinia's abilities left him trembling in his shoes. Nevertheless, he still stood his ground. "You've killed so many of our clansmen. There is no doubt that Master Ghost Scorpion." He tried his best to appear fearless, though a drop of sweat trickled down his temple. "Master Ghost Scorpion will definitely kill you." Zen came out from behind, smiling. "Which is why I instructed her to keep you alive," he chuckled. "Go on, inform your Master Ghost Scorpion. I wonder how he plans to get rid of us." The lone member of the tail insect race was astonished to hear what Zen said. He saw Zen as too confident to care about the tail insect race or even their Master Ghost Scorpion. But since Zen seemed so willing to let go of him, he didn't dare speak another word. There was no way he wanted to die for no reason. Just as the survivor was about to walk away, Abdul gritted his teeth and said, "Well, I guess we should just kill them all at this point. Don't want to leave some that could cause future trouble." It would be a big trouble that the members of the tail insect race had all died at a place of the Oneness Sky Palace. However, the Oneness Sky Palace could still deny it, and settle their actions with a large amount of soul pills at the worst. But if they allowed one member of the tail insect race to stay alive, the consequences would be unimaginable. Elvinia gently rubbed her fingertips at the sound of Abdul's idea. To her, she didn't care about the insects one bit. She simply thought that they were too dirty, so she suddenly wanted to get a sword from the other shore. She looked at Zen, silently asking if they should follow through to kill the last member of the tail insect race. Zen, on the other hand, was not convinced. "Let him go," he said, walking away. The reason why he had allowed Elvinia to kill them was because he wanted to intimidate the force behind the race. He didn't think it was a good idea to compromise, especially when their group was at a disadvantage. He didn't agree with Abdul's approach. "Excuse me, but who the heck are you? Are you trying to harm the Oneness Sky Palace?" Abdul slammed his palm on Zen's chest, shouting at him and gritting his teeth. He was knowledgeable of Thad's name from the land of Sword Grief. But very little was known of his identity and his relation with the Oneness Sky Palace, so it was hard to tell if Thad was actually a disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace. For Abdul, offending creatures on the other shore would only put the Oneness Sky Palace in danger. He believed that he had every right to be angry. Zen shook off Abdul's hand, and leaned in close, smiling. "My name is Zen." The senior disciples in the land of Sword Grief were stunned to hear his name. All their eyes widened and mouths opened. Likewise, the disciples who had just entered the chaotic source realm were stunned as well. They remembered that Zen had been absent since his soul of light reached stage 14. Some people who had an inkling never dared to ask him. Now they were sure that Thad was in fact Zen. As for Hyam, he had already guessed it correctly before, so he was not at all surprised at the turn of events. Previously, Zen had unintentionally exposed some of his secrets in the chaotic source world. At this point, there was no need for him to hide this fact any longer, especially because it limited much of his actions. That was why now was the perfect time to reveal this secret. In front of the wooden building, Zen suddenly turned around and patted his forehead. "By the way, make sure that insect gives back the jade and soul crystal he took from us just now." He winked at everyone, and then made his way into the wooden building, somewhat enjoying everyone's speechlessness. Nearly every super force had one or even several races on the other shore as their patron, and the Oneness Sky Palace was no exception. However, the race that was behind the Oneness Sky Palace was not very strong in stage 14 of the other shore. This placed the disciples of the Land of Sword Grief in a very compromising position, a position of disadvantage. Over the past years, they had just been giving in. It was through this persistent perseverance that they were able to find a place to reside in. This was the main reason why they were unwilling to stay in stage 14 of the other shore. With a sternness in his expression, Abdul did not fail to mention the current situation of the Oneness Sky Palace to Zen. "What you are doing will make us unable to do anything on the other shore," he said harshly. "I wonder how major races, like the Bering race and the Separate Abyss race, are treated in stage 14 anyway," Zen replied calmly, facing the already agitated Abdul. "Their patrons are all strong in stage 14, so they definitely have no threats on the other shore," Abdul responded impatiently. This brought about a sense of dismay among the senior disciples from the Land of Sword Grief. After all, they were all notable and outstanding members of the Oneness Sky Palace. None of them was willing to be bullied on the other shore. After being in deep thought, Zen said with a smile, "If you always give in, the insects may only go further. And because we don't have a powerful patron behind us, that should be our #1 priority right now." "Easy for you to say. Who would we even find to be our patron? Would you do it? Would you be our patron?" one of the senior disciples asked. Zen turned his head and looked at Elvinia, who was sitting calmly by his side. Her corporeal body of purified being had been carved to perfection, as it was a product of imagination. On top of that, she was full of charm and zest. Then, Zen turned around and answered, "If we can't find a patron, we'll make one of our own." Chapter 3105, Entrusted. Streaks of dark red light flickered in the compound eyes of the insect man. He shuttled nimbly through the myriad spirit city, his heart filled with grief and indignation for his dead companions. Because the lowly souls of light managed to find a couple of corporeal bodies, they wanted to challenge Master Ghost Scorpion. They were merely courting death. Many ferns covered the northern part of the myriad spirit city. Strange races populated the other shore, all of them sorted into classes. The tail insect race lived up north, where several bug-like creatures resided. When the member of the tail insect race came to the northern part of the city, he headed straight into a deep cave. Various small pots hung within the cave walls, in which a variety of strange bugs were kept. When he reached the very bottom of the cave, a strange fragrance filled the space. It was the scent of the fragrant butterfly race. Master Ghost Scorpion was particularly fond of this fragrance. He always kept several female members of the race close by. Soon, the insect man reached the end of the path. A hoarse voice resounded. "Have you collected the body-strengthening jade and soul crystal as I asked?" From within the darkness, a black scorpion rested his tail on the ground. A small hook at the end of his tail reflected a harsh light, making the insect man swallow down his nerves hard. He had seen how Master Ghost Scorpion punished his subordinate before. The subordinate's skin was merely scratched by the hook before his entire body turned black. He died in the blink of an eye. The member of the tail insect race was feeling anxious about the news he had to bring back. He knew he would undoubtedly piss the Ghost Scorpion off. "Yes," he replied nervously. "Haha, I didn't expect the Oneness Sky Palace to endure it." The Ghost Scorpion laughed in the darkness before continuing, "Hand over the jade and soul crystal. I'll have someone else collect them another day." The Ghost Scorpion hadn't ever acted against the Oneness Sky Palace. The latter was under the protection of the myriad spirit city guards, after all. But the Ghost Scorpion was entrusted to continue suppressing the palace. He was determined to see how long they could endure. But, there was a moment of hesitation before the messenger continued, "The Oneness Sky Palace has taken back the jade and soul crystal I've collected." "What?" The Ghost Scorpion's voice turned deadly cold. His tail curled up from where he rested on the ground. "The Oneness Sky Palace seems to have found 2 corporeal bodies. A human woman took action and killed my comrades. She left me alive so I could bring you the news. Master Ghost Scorpion, please uphold justice for us." The insect man seemed grim. "Corporeal bodies? How could they have corporeal bodies?" the master asked in confusion. Because only souls of light were allowed to enter the other shore, it had been many years since he had ever seen a corporeal body. The news was truly puzzling. "It's true my comrades wouldn't have died otherwise," the messenger continued. A moment of silence passed before the Ghost Scorpion leaned in from the darkness. "They left you alive so that you could inform me of what happened?" "Yes, that's right. Then your mission has been completed." Suddenly, his tail rose and stabbed at the messenger with incredible speed. While the sharp hook managed to slice through the messenger's body, it failed to cut his shell, leaving only a thin, invisible wound on the surface. All the messenger could see was the ghost scorpion wagging his tail. Realizing that he was in a highly dangerous situation, he turned around, ready to flee. But before he could even take another step, he suddenly went numb and fell to the ground, losing consciousness in an instant. In the darkness, a sturdy creature took slow steps forward. A layer of black armor covered the creature, and 6 pairs of eyes sat on his head. His hateful face looked strong. Standing on his feet, he positioned his long tail behind him. 2 beautiful women of the fragrant butterfly race followed him behind. They resembled humans with their graceful bodies. "Master Ghost Scorpion, are you going to attack the Oneness Sky Palace?" The woman's voice was incredibly alluring. "Since someone entrusted me to do it, I have no other choice," replied the creature. "The souls of light of the Oneness Sky Palace can be killed rather easily," the woman continued. "But how should we deal with the 2 corporeal bodies?" The ghost scorpion gently flicked his tail and pierced it into the dead messenger's head. Soon after, he obtained his memory, witnessing in his mind everything that had just unfolded. The creature's lips curled into a subtle smile. "Take them as 2 creatures on the other shore." Meanwhile, in the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace. Hearing Zen's words, Abdul didn't feel relieved. Instead, he grew worried. "It's easier said than done. The ghost scorpion will be coming for us soon. Do you know that?" As Abdul rambled on, a cold light flashed in Elvinia's eyes. "If you're afraid, then leave the other shore. If you keep talking nonsense, I won't hesitate to kill you as well." Elvinia might not have been much of a match for Abdul in the land of sword grief, but on the other shore, Abdul was nothing more than a fly she could squish between her palms. Abdul fell into silence, and so did the other senior disciples of the land of sword grief. The Oneness Sky Palace belonged to Eastern Emperor Tai. Since Elvinia took Zen's side, what else could they say? But Zen didn't care much about Abdul's attitude. He merely turned to the other disciples and said, "Everyone, you have reached stage 14. For safety's sake, you can temporarily withdraw from the other shore. I will make further plans once Elvinia and I explore this place more thoroughly." The disciples there were rather discouraged. If they were involved in a fight, they might be trapped by something like the soul-binding thread, unable to escape. "Well then Zen, Princess Elvinia, be careful. We must leave now." Quote. And so one after another, the disciples, souls of light began to dissipate. Before withdrawing from the other shore, Abdul threw Zen a fierce glare. At last, only Zen, Elvinia, and Dorothy were left. "Dorothy," Zen called out. "I'm here with you," she called back. "What?" Elvinia said with a frown. "I didn't say that I wanted to stay with you. I am merely accompanying Zen," Dorothy explained flatly but firmly. Though she had been rather quiet for a while, she couldn't help but throw back a retort. "You're only risking your life by staying here. You'd better leave." Elvinia was still defiant. "Oh, really?" A mocking smile appeared on Dorothy's face. "Do you really think you're stronger than me with this corporeal body?" Chapter 3106, The Door. Dorothy's words surprised Zen and Elvinia. The difference between the soul of light and the physical body was obviously vast. Zen had no idea how powerful Eastern Emperor Tai and the Snake Goddess were on the other shore, but at least on stage 14, there was a world of difference between the soul of light and the physical body. Moreover, Elvinia's purified being body was much stronger than that of a normal creature on the other shore. "I really don't know how you could be so confident," Elvinia sneered, staring at Dorothy. "Oh, do you want to find out? I can show you," Dorothy snapped in response. From their tone of voice, it was obvious the 2 women were raring for a fight. Zen decided he could no longer just stay silent. He had never been good at dealing with relationship problems. Back then, the bickering between Margaret and Letitia had also troubled him a lot. Zen strode over and stood between the 2. He faced Dorothy, speaking to her gently, "This place is too dangerous for you. You can come back after Elvinia and I deal with this matter." "I won't be a burden," Dorothy retorted stubbornly. She had always brimmed with confidence, being the renowned talent of the Origin Mountain. This had only gone unnoticed because she had always been content to just play backup to Zen, who tended to draw all the attention. She would never stand for being treated like a liability. "If you don't want to get in the way, then get out of here," said Elvinia. "Elvinia," Zen hissed, a warning in his low voice. Elvinia shrugged and took a step back, looking indifferent. Zen then turned back to Dorothy. "I have never seen you as a burden. Without your help, I wouldn't have made it this far." He paused, before adding, "Besides, I've seen your door." While Dorothy and Elvenia were both top women talents in the Oneness Sky Palace, they were different on essential points. Elvenia was the biological daughter of Flamen and Eastern Emperor Tai. She had inherited their bloodline. On the other hand, it seemed that Dorothy didn't inherit the bloodline of Yasmin. No one had ever mentioned the reason to Zen, but it didn't mean that he couldn't guess it. The reason why Yasmin still thought highly of Dorothy was not just that she cared for her and doted on her. It was because there was something special in Dorothy. Zen had discovered in the sacred Mallow Temple the sealed door that had been hidden within Dorothy's soul. Dorothy trembled at Zen's words. "I happened to discover it when I made use of the Great Dominance technique at that time," Zen explained. "You don't need to deal with the weak creatures on stage 14. Just trust me and wait for us in the land of sword grief, okay?" Dorothy decided to compromise. Although she could open the door after she reached stage 14, her grandma, indeed, cautioned her that she should only open it as a last resort. "All right." Dorothy nodded at Zen. Then her eyes met Elvenia's again. Elvenia didn't avoid her gaze, staring back coolly. "Humph." Dorothy snorted at Elvenia as her soul finally dissipated. After Dorothy left, Elvenia tilted her head. "You are in quite the dilemma, aren't you?" she asked Zen with a playful smile. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Zen muttered unconvincingly. "I'll make you understand, soon enough." Elvenia smiled slyly, amusement glinting in her eyes. The stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace was now empty. Only Zen and Elvenia were left there. In contrast, the Bronze Palace in the land of sword grief was now in an uproar. Zen and Elvenia made short work of the members of the tail insect race. Wouldn't that enrage the ghost scorpion? Pissing off the ghost scorpion in the Myriad Spirits City would only mean trouble. "I shall go report on this matter." Abdul exited the training room. Soon, the news had spread out. The news spread from the first floor to the second floor. The disciples of the land of sword grief were shocked to learn about this development. Even if Elvenia has a physical body, she still wouldn't be able to fight against the powerful creatures of stage 14. "I'm afraid this means we can't take even a single step in the desire world in the future." I really didn't expect them to cause such trouble. But they could do nothing but wait anxiously. It was impossible to change the situation. There were some warriors who volunteered to enter the other shore to persuade Zen and Elvenia to come back, so the Oneness Sky Palace could send others to mediate in the dispute. However, this plan was rejected by Abdul and the others. They knew that given Zen's and Elvenia's personalities, they would not be persuaded easily. As the disciples of the land of sword grief racked their brains on what to do, dozens of members of the tail insect race poured into a street from the north of the Myriad Spirits City, rushing forward at high speed from both sides. The living beings in the Myriad Spirits City were divided into different grades. The tail insect race was known for being domineering and bloodthirsty, and they grew even more unscrupulous after they pledged allegiance to the ghost scorpion. When the other creatures of the other shore saw them, they all scrambled out of their way. Soon, the tail insects were directly outside the wooden building of the Oneness Sky Palace. At one nod from the leader of the group, the other members of the race stretched out their hands, each of which held what appeared to be a green grass ball. The smell that emanated from the ball was like that of the soul-interdicting water and the soul-binding thread. Such an item was obviously used to prevent anything from leaving the other shore. Swish, swish, swish. The tail insects threw the grass balls through the open wooden doors. The balls exploded when they landed inside, diffusing a thick green smoke. Whoever was infected by this smoke would not be able to leave the other shore. Soon, a cloud of thick smoke had filled the wooden building. Just as the members of the tail insect race moved to raid the building, a voice came from behind them. "Are you looking for me?" The tail insects were stunned. The few who reacted quickly stomped their legs, causing their other shore power to erupt. They waved the sharp cones in their hands and charged at Zen. Too slow. Zen stood still, not making a move at all. As the cones came toward him, Zen just twisted slightly, evading them completely. His hands darted out. Biff, biff, biff. He plucked out the approaching creatures' heads, as easily if he were simply picking vegetables. Every head he plucked off was sent flying in the air. After doing that 9 times in a row, Zen stepped back. The bodies of the 9 tail insects remained standing, even as their heads fell to the ground. How disappointing. Are these useless creatures all Master Ghost Scorpion can send to a fight? Zen shook his head. Having just witnessed the massacre of their peers, the compound eyes of the other members of the tail insect race gleamed with panic. Chapter 3107, Taking Action Personally. The members of the tail insect race had received an order from the ghost scorpion asking them to kill everyone belonging to the Oneness Sky Palace. It never occurred to them that no soul of light from the Oneness Sky Palace remained on the other shore. Moreover, a powerful human being was now standing before them. How could they not be afraid? The remaining members of the tail insect race panicked and began to chuck the green grass balls at Zen. Before the balls could explode, another figure appeared behind them. It was none other than Elvenia. A long sword appeared in Elvenia's hand. She did not want to touch these dirty bugs. When she had found a long sword in the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace, she had known that it would come in handy, even though it was ordinary. She slashed the sword at the creatures, drawing a long, uneven line that turned green almost instantly. Every member of the tail insect race, except the last one, dropped dead. Zen walked out of the billowing green smoke. Elvenia glanced at him and said, "You're tainted with this smoke. What if you can't get out of the other shore?" "I don't intend to leave," Zen said with a smile. Elvenia pursed her lips. The ghost scorpion hadn't shown up yet, and they didn't know how powerful the ghost scorpion was. But Zen looked pretty confident. You, the last survivor uttered, his voice trembling. "Tell the ghost scorpion to come and meet us in person," Zen said, his voice sending chills through the survivor's spine. Relieved, the tail insect quickly made his escape. News traveled fast among the races in the myriad spirit city. The news that a number of tail insects had died in close proximity to the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold spread like wildfire. The tail insect race followed the ghost scorpion, which meant that the Oneness Sky Palace would surely have pissed off the ghost scorpion this time. The Oneness Sky Palace? Human beings can only enter the other shore with their souls, right? These souls have always been weak and easy to bully. They are courteous when they meet the members of our race. How dare they provoke the ghost scorpion? They are in serious trouble. The ones who were curious moved towards the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold. Some hid behind the wall and some went into the living area to secretly take a peek at the goings-on. They were shocked to see the corpses of the tail insects scattered on the ground. A man sat at the door of the wooden building, his back erect and posture majestic, while a woman stood beside him, with a sword in her hand. They had no intention of escaping or of letting anyone escape. It's going to be a good show. It looks like they are not afraid of the ghost scorpion. That's because they don't know how strong the ghost scorpion is. They will die miserable deaths. In the city guard house of the Myriad Spirit City, two giants entered the city guard house to report on the news of the Oneness Sky Palace. A bear-like creature sat on the host seat of the hall of the city guard house. At the news, he only said, "I see. Sir, should we stop the ghost scorpion?" One of the giants asked. "No need," the black bear replied, shaking his head. The Oneness Sky Palace usually sent in a considerable amount of soul pills every year in hope of the city guard house's protection in exchange. Ordinarily, the city guard house would solve it in person. But this time, it had, alongside the ghost scorpion, been entrusted with the mission to take action against it. What was more, even if the ghost scorpion didn't make a move, the city guard house definitely would. An hour later, 3 red giant scorpions and over 100 tail insects crawled out of the underground cave at the north of the city. Zen and Elvenia had already killed 2 groups from the tail insect race, but they still weren't successful in attracting the ghost scorpion's attention. It looked like the ghost scorpion had no intention of fighting them personally. The 3 giant scorpions weren't intelligent but were ferocious creatures. They were forbidden from entering the Myriad Spirit City. But some of the rules were only for those at the bottom of the society. And the ghost scorpion didn't have to comply with the rules. The 3 scorpions, carried by the tail insects, moved along the street and caused complete chaos, shrieks to fill the air. This excited the creatures of the other shore, who were observing them secretly. The ghost scorpion has sent the red scorpion squad. They can kill the man and the woman 10 times over. They are not strong enough but they still want to fight the ghost scorpion. How arrogant do they have to be? When the 3 red scorpions were carried into the path, another cloud of green smoke rose. It was a few minutes before the green smoke dissipated gradually. The many creatures hiding in the darkness were shocked as they watched this scene. The 3 red scorpions lay on the ground, their tails cut off. The corpses of the tail insects were piled up like a hill. This time again, Zen left alive one member of the tail insect race and asked him to go back and inform the others. They have destroyed the red scorpion squad so easily. Are these 2 human beings that formidable? Something is wrong. The red scorpion squad was the backbone of the ghost scorpion, and each red scorpion had extraordinary levels of strength. These giant red scorpions were at the very least stronger and more powerful than many creatures at stage 14 except for the creatures of the dark region. But they being killed so suddenly and in one fell swoop shocked those creatures of the other shore. An hour later, many huge butterflies emerged from the underground cave at the north of the city, their fragrance spreading in all directions. The burly figure of the ghost scorpion soon followed. If the first group of the tail insects had been only to test them, the red scorpion squad he had later sent should be enough to kill the two human beings. But the situation hadn't gone as the ghost scorpion had expected. Even the members of the red scorpion squad had been destroyed. Only one tail insect had survived and returned to tell the story. "Sir, is it necessary for you to kill the two human beings?" a woman from the fragrant butterfly race asked. The ghost scorpion squinted and responded, "I will take personal action against them." The ghost scorpion rarely left his underground cave. He had lurked in the myriad spirits city for many years, and didn't get on well with the city guard house. But the city guard house couldn't do anything about him. Catching the ghost scorpion was a distant daydream for the city guard house. "But will the city guard house?" another woman from the fragrant butterfly race said worriedly. "Don't worry, the city guard house won't create any disturbance," the ghost scorpion sneered. The ghost scorpion then led the women of the fragrant butterfly race onto the path. Soon, they spotted Zen and Elvinia in the distance. His 6 pairs of eyes glowed with a bright red light. And as he noticed the corpses of the 3 giant red scorpions, he filled with rage. How dare these insignificant human beings kill the members of the red scorpion squad? Zen still sat there in silence, a calm expression on his face. The moment he saw the ghost scorpion's sturdy black body, and his thin, long tail, he spoke, "You are finally here. All of this will be over if we kill the ghost scorpion, won't it?" Elvinia asked. "It's hard to say," Zen said, shaking his head. After Zen and Elvinia had entered the myriad spirit city, these creatures had caused trouble for the Oneness Sky Palace, which was not coincidental. There must be a reason for it. Chapter 3108, Tell the Truth. Zen's identity had already been exposed in the chaotic source world. At least from the soaring snake sword, they could easily tell where Zen came from. Perhaps the Bering race wouldn't attack the Oneness Sky Palace so soon, but that didn't mean that they wouldn't want to assault Zen on the other shore. It was known that the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold on stage 14 was not difficult to find, and it was easy to observe the movements of their disciples. Thus, it would be effortless for the Bering race to use the other shore creatures to attack him. "When will it end?" Elvinia asked. "When they are afraid," Zen said as the corner of his lips curved up. He slowly got up and announced, "You step back. I'll fight this battle." After all, the sharp edge of the ghost scorpion's tail contained a highly toxic poison, and he didn't want Elvinia to take the risk. In reality, he had indeed guessed the truth. When he and the other members of the Oneness Sky Palace entered the Desire World, the Sun Crow race discovered them. Soon enough, the news quickly spread to the other races. The Oneness Sky Palace was weak on stage 14, a complete opposite to the powerful forces on stage 14 like the Bering race, the Divine Farmer race, and the Sun Crow race. There were a total of 2 cities on stage 14, namely, the Myriad Spirit City and the Sky Water City. There were a large number of other shore creatures in these 2 cities. The Star Falcon race, which came from the same origin as the Sun Crow race, was the leading force in the Sky Water City. The relationship between those 2 races was similar to that of the separate Abyss race and the Abyss Spirit race. Although the Star Falcon race didn't exactly hold great power in the Myriad Spirit City, they were still a powerful other shore race, and it was still easy for them to deal with the likes of the Oneness Sky Palace, which appeared on the other shore in the form of souls. 3,000 feet away from the wooden building of the Oneness Sky Palace was an oval-shaped building with a terrace on top. More than a dozen souls of light stood on the terrace, which turned out to be from the Bering race, the Sun Crow race, and other 2 races. At first, I was worried that if they directly retreated from the other shore, then we would have no way to deal with them, a soul of light said in a lazy voice. Retreat from the other shore? That's impossible. Unless they don't plan to improve their cultivation, it's inevitable that they will enter the other shore, another soul of light sneered. It had 2 wings spreading on its back, which obviously told that it came from the Sun Crow race. But I think these 2 people are quite confident about themselves. They don't have the slightest intention of giving in. Well, it's actually a good thing. Overconfidence would bring them death. When they are dead, our task is finished. The best way to kill Elvinia and Thad was to do it on the other shore. The Bering race, the Sun Crow race, and the other 2 races had undoubtedly chosen the simplest and most effective way to solve the problem. Meanwhile, Zen sauntered towards the ghost scorpion and said, "We have no grudge against each other. Someone must have entrusted you with the task of attacking me. Tell me who it is." The ghost scorpion, however, thought of the two humans as mere fish on the chopping block, especially now that they had been tainted with the green smoke. It was impossible for them to escape. They were the ones who should have felt despair. In a normal case, Zen should have knelt down and begged for mercy, in hopes that he could spare his life. Yet, what he was currently doing was completely out of the ghost scorpion's expectation. Zen didn't feel anxious. In fact, he didn't seem to be so afraid of anything, and not even the slightest fear could be felt from him. You killed my subordinates, of course you have to die. How could you say that I have no grudge against you? The ghost scorpion smirked. No matter what happened, the ghost scorpion had ethics, and those who had entrusted him with the task had given him a generous reward. So, why would he tell who was behind the scheme all just because of a word from Zen? It was true that this human warrior would end up as a corpse soon, but there were a lot of spies in the myriad spirit city. In fact, the ghost scorpion clearly felt that there were many eyes staring at their position now. At that moment, a few huge creatures ran towards them from the other end of the path. They were mice as tall as an ox. In addition, they carried the souls of light of the ear mice on their backs. Squeak, Master Ghost Scorpion, please don't hurt him, one of the ear mice shouted. The ear mice were creatures that could be seen almost anywhere. In the Desire World, their power could not be underestimated. The murine creatures in the Desire World in particular had quite a close relationship with the ear mice. They were a compelling force in the myriad spirit city, strong enough to contend against the ghost scorpion. The ear mice had also formed a close relationship with Zen on stage 13, and they also benefited a lot from him in the chaotic source world. Besides, they also got a fair share of chaotic source spirits. After their spies, which penetrated everywhere, had gotten the news about the Oneness Sky Palace, they immediately jumped into action. Their efforts led them to where they were right now, with the purpose to convince the ghost scorpion not to harm Zen. Don't hurt him, that is impossible, the ghost scorpion said flatly. The mice from the southern area actually want to mess around. Who do they think they are? Ear mice, you'd better not provoke Master Ghost Scorpion. This is not something you can change. The women of the fragrant butterfly race sneered. If it had been another time, the ghost scorpion might have given them some face. Given the special situation today, however, the ghost scorpion clearly wouldn't listen to them. Master Ghost Scorpion, I think we could work something out. The price can be negotiated, one of the mice said. The ear mice appeared to be very generous, and there were no doubts about their powerful financial capacity. There is nothing we can talk about on this matter. You can leave now, the ghost scorpion coldly replied. Master Ghost Scorpion, just as one ear mouse was still trying to persuade the ghost scorpion to change his mind, Zen interrupted them and said, I appreciate your kindness, but I'll take care of this. The ear mice who sat on the back of the giant mice looked at Zen in confusion. According to the information they had obtained before, Thad was powerful, but he might not be strong enough to fight against the ghost scorpion. Did you hear that? This little guy doesn't want you to intervene. Mice, you'd better get out of here, the ghost scorpion chuckled. He seemed to become more and more interested in Zen. Zen's next words, however, suddenly made his body stiff. Let's continue our conversation about who ordered you to kill me. Now, tell me the truth, and I can give you a quick death, Zen said in a calm voice, as if he had already decided the fate of the ghost scorpion. The women of the fragrant butterfly race, who watched from behind, were all stunned. The ear mice beside them were also dumbfounded, and even the giant mice that they sat on stared at Zen with eyes wide open. Only Elvinia, who stood in front of the wooden building, looked rather indifferent. At that point, rays of light that were as thin as needles danced nimbly on her fingertips. Recently, she had gotten more and more proficient in using the great Sanskrit light. The light her fingers emitted looked ethereal, and could change into almost any shape according to her will. In addition to being able to turn it into clothes, she also wanted to try if she could turn it into a pair of wings. Chapter 3109, Dismemberment. All the other shore creatures that lurked, peeked, and eavesdropped in the buildings on both sides of the road couldn't believe their ears. What did that young human say? Did I hear it wrong? He was threatening Master Ghost Scorpion. Oh, my goodness, he must be crazy. The ghost scorpion might not be the strongest other shore creature in the myriad spirit city, but he was definitely a local powerhouse. He controlled almost the entire underground world in the north of the myriad spirit city by himself, and even the city guardhouse couldn't do anything to him. Whoever dared to provoke him would have a miserable ending. Usually, they seldom had the chance to see the sunrise on the next day. Yet, there was Zen, who unhesitatingly instigated such a being. The creatures on the other shore all thought something was wrong with him. The souls of light of the Bearing race, the Sun Crow race, and other races, who stayed on the terrace of the oval-shaped building 3,000 feet away, were also shocked and confused at Zen's words. That guy's reaction is a little unexpected. Humph, he is only trying to pretend and bluff when he is dying. Anyway, he knows he is going to die. Maybe he felt it was good to pretend to be a hero before he dies. In their opinion, it was still impossible for Zen to fight against the ghost scorpion even if he had a corporeal body. After all, it had cost them a lot of resources to hire the ghost scorpion. Meanwhile, the ghost scorpion went stiff for about a dozen seconds, before he finally let out a muffled wild laugh. Ha ha ha. As the ghost scorpion's laughs rang out, the female members of the fragrant butterfly race behind him burst into giggles as well. Humans are so interesting. Before the ghost scorpion could finish his words, Zen took a step forward. That one step he took towards the ghost scorpion was over 100 feet. He was able to do so because he used his heels to generate power and forcefully suppress the ground, thereby leaving a crater behind. At the same time, he stretched his hand towards the ghost scorpion and gently passed by his body. Then, he stood behind his opponent, at the side of the female members of the fragrant butterfly race. At that moment, his hand was holding the ghost scorpion's right arm. He didn't tell the truth, so I have no choice but to let him die in pain. Take it, he said flatly. The female members of the fragrant butterfly race who had been cackling with the ghost scorpion at Zen's words, had never thought that things would change in the blink of an eye. The wide grins on their faces froze as they stared at the arm Zen was holding in disbelief. One of them glanced at the ghost scorpion, only to find that his right arm was indeed detached from his shoulder. When Zen saw that none of the female members of the fragrant butterfly race wanted to take the arm, he shook his head and casually threw the disconnected limb on the ground. Then, he turned around and stomped his foot once again. Dong! A muffled sound came from the soft ground once again. The high pressure caused the soil to spread out everywhere like waves, and created a bottomless hole in the ground. At the same time, Zen once again passed by the ghost scorpion. This time, however, the ghost scorpion had time to react. He wasn't slow to react by any means, it was just that Zen's current speed was far beyond his limit. The moment Zen attacked him for the second time, the ghost scorpion chose to fight back. He stretched out his remaining arm towards Zen and simultaneously swept his tail. Crack! Yet, Zen had gotten away from him in a flash. Moreover, he also took the ghost scorpion's left arm with him. In just 2 confrontations, Zen had already removed both of the ghost scorpion's arms, but the latter didn't look bothered at all. Instead, his lips stretched into a grim smile. Human, your speed is indeed beyond my expectations, but it's a pity for you. He wagged his tail as he spoke, and the hook on it glowed faintly. He was quite proud of his tail, which could move extremely fast. Without any warning, the tail's hook swept past Zen's waist. Now, the ghost scorpion was sure that he could kill Zen with his tail. To his surprise, however, he heard Zen say indifferently, "Have you heard of the chaotic source spirit?" The chaotic source spirit, Ghost Scorpion said dumbly. As a master in stage 14 of the other shore, he did not know much about the higher stages of the desire world. He had heard that the chaotic source spirit was connected with the source world before, but he didn't think that was important. Thus, he had no idea why Zen mentioned it out of the blue. Your attack just now was far from enough to exhaust my chaotic source spirits, Zen said with a shake of his head. It is even less than sufficient to harm me, not to mention. I'm not afraid of the poison at all. Zen had experienced all kinds of highly toxic poisons before. Therefore, the poisonous hook on the ghost scorpion's tail couldn't harm him. Furthermore, the ghost scorpion's attack did not exhaust the chaotic source spirits, nor did it cut through his skin. Such were the big advantages of the chaotic source realm warriors. While the ghost scorpion still pondered over Zen's words, Zen's body flashed across him with 2 muffled sounds once again. At that point, Zen had detached one of the ghost scorpion's legs. Naturally, he lost his balance and fell down to the ground. Ah! The female members of the fragrant butterfly race behind Ghost Scorpion let out a series of shrieks. After a while, they finally came back to their senses, but they didn't seem to have any better means of expression other than screaming. Then, 2 of them flapped their wings and released a gust of colorful poisonous smog. The poisonous smog could be inhaled through mouths and noses. Anyone who had absorbed it would become paralyzed and unable to move. Upon seeing the poisonous smog, the ear mice immediately went away to dodge it. As for Zen, he simply ignored the existence of such poisonous smog, and he didn't pay any attention to the female members of the fragrant butterfly race. He once again passed by the ghost scorpion. Crack, the other leg of the ghost scorpion was also taken away by Zen. Crack, even his tail, which he was very proud of, was also detached from his body. Now with only a head and a torso, he lay on the ground, unable to move. Lying on the ground, he felt like he was dreaming. Just now, he had been thinking about how to deal with this arrogant and unruly human. But less than half a minute later, he had almost been dismembered by Zen. He could not help but doubt the facticity of all this. "I'll give you one more chance to tell me whose orders you're under," Zen asked. He thought he had guessed it correctly, but still he wanted to confirm his guess. Without even launching any powerful attack, the ghost scorpion had lost his arms, legs, and even his tail. It was not until then that he was finally filled with fear. He had accepted the commission without thinking too much. Now, it turned out that he had fallen into such a deep pit, which was way beyond what he had predicted. He felt a lot of remorse and hatred for the one who had asked him to do all this. "It's the Star Falcon race. The Star Falcon race," Ghost Scorpion shouted loudly. Zen had just arrived at the Myriad Spirit City and didn't know much about the races on the other shore in the Desire World, so of course, he didn't know anything about the Star Falcon race. An ear mouse who was not far away explained to him, "The Star Falcon race is a major race in Stage 14 of the other shore. They occupy another city, which is called Skywater City. They have been supporting the Sun Crow race." The ear mice were well informed, so they clearly knew about such information. The Sun Crow race. Zen pursed his lips. "Let me go." Just as the ghost scorpion was about to beg for mercy, he saw that Zen had stretched his hand towards his head. When he realized what was about to happen, his head was already decapitated. Chapter 3110, Wealth. Witnessing the death of the ghost scorpion, the members of the fragrant butterfly race took on a ghastly expression. They had relied on the ghost scorpion, king of the underground world in the northern part of the Myriad Spirit City. Massive change was bound to happen due to his sudden death. Overwhelmed with anxiety, they froze in place, unable to even consider fleeing. The souls of light on the terrace of the oval-shaped building were also dumbfounded. "The ghost scorpion is actually weak. That man is too powerful. The ghost scorpion was no match for him. Alas, I made a wrong judgment before. I have to go back to report this." These souls of light had stayed to watch Thad and Elvinia die. They had thought that their demise was certain, so the unexpected turn of events shocked them numb. Buzz. A demon woman disappeared from the terrace and returned to the source world. The demon women were not staying in the divine lair all the time. Most of the time, they lived in golden divine trees. When the demon woman appeared in a golden divine tree, she spread out her wings and flew towards the divine lair. At the sight of the flying figure, the sun crows rose high into the air and squawked excitedly. Upon the arrival of the demon woman, she knelt before Elizabeth. The ghost scorpion at stage 14 was easily killed by the man named Thad. Elizabeth clarified. "Yes, he had no power to fight back," the demon woman answered, head still bowed. Even though she had witnessed the whole thing with her own eyes, she still couldn't believe it. "I see." Elizabeth nodded calmly. "The ghost scorpion is just an unimportant pawn, anyway. Don't worry. Continue observing. Someone else will fight Thad." The creatures at stage 14 were the weakest in the entire Desire World. It didn't matter even if they failed. However, something bugged Elizabeth. It was very likely that Thad was actually Zen. Although Elizabeth hadn't been able to confirm it, it didn't matter. As long as she could get rid of Thad and Elvinia, she would be willing to pay the price. Spreading out her massive wings, she closed her eyes and transferred to the other shore. The souls of light of the Bearing race, the Sun Crow race and the other two races were not the only stunned ones. All the creatures that secretly watched were also speechless, shocked stiff. Everyone was afraid of the ghost scorpion, the leader of the underground world. Ordinary creatures didn't dare to provoke him. They would stay away from him lest they cause trouble. However, just now, he didn't even have a chance to strike back and died at the gate of the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold. The Oneness Sky Palace was just an ordinary force in the eyes of the creatures on the other shore. The lowly souls of light of the Oneness Sky Palace were very careful to keep a low profile, and were usually polite to any creatures they stumbled across in the Myriad Spirit City. In fact, many creatures had taken advantage of their meek nature and robbed them of their soul pills, and occasionally, even soul crystal. Is that human brat an outsider hired by the Oneness Sky Palace? I have never seen that woman. But that human man has actually come to the other shore with his corporeal body. I extorted 20,000 soul pills from them not long ago. If they find out what I did, I might be in big trouble. The people from the source world could leave the other shore at any time if they wanted to, but the creatures on the other shore couldn't. If they had offended someone they shouldn't have, they'd have no choice but to run away from the myriad spirit city. Like the other creatures on the other shore, the several ear mice that were watching from the backs of giant mice were also dumbstruck, staring at the corpse of the ghost scorpion. They had originally planned to help Zen get out of this situation, but apparently, he didn't need their help. At the same time, they felt somewhat relieved. At the very least, they didn't have any bad blood with Zen. Then again, if they had been able to lend Zen a hand at the time, they could have asked for something in exchange. Ear mice, Zen suddenly called out, interrupting their thoughts. With a squeak, the leader of the ear mice answered promptly, "Thad, what can we do for you?" Zen glanced at the corpse of the ghost scorpion and asked, since the ghost scorpion has occupied the northern part of the myriad spirit city for many years, he should have accumulated quite a bit of wealth and resources, right? Hearing Zen's words, the ear mice suddenly shivered. They had been so shocked by Zen's power that they forgot this. The ghost scorpion occupied the underground world in the northern part of the myriad spirit city. Over the years, he had accumulated wealth, but with his death, what would become of it? As long as the news of the ghost scorpion's death was spread to the north of the city, the creatures that followed the ghost scorpion would definitely scramble to take as much of the wealth he had left. I want half of his accumulated wealth. The other half belongs to you, Zen said. The ear mice exchanged glances. Their leader promptly said to an underling, "Hurry up. Go to the north of the city." Like the ghost scorpion, the ear mice were also active in the underground world of the myriad spirit city. The ghost scorpion was in the north, while the ear mice were in the south. They each minded their own business, without interfering with each other. Now that the ghost scorpion was dead, naturally, this was a great opportunity for the ear mice. Not only could they collect the immense wealth, but they could also take over the northern territory. As for Zen's request, they wouldn't have objected even if he asked for all of the wealth. The appointed ear mouse left quickly. Zen indifferently glanced at the women from the fragrant butterfly race not far away, who had tried to attack him with poison just now. However, he knew they were powerless against him, especially since the ghost scorpion was killed. He waved his hand at them and said, "You can go now." The women trembled slightly as Zen addressed them. They had been standing there, not daring to run away. To their surprise, Zen just asked them to leave like that. They couldn't believe their ears. Once Zen finished his words, he immediately turned around and walked straight towards Elvinia. Unexpectedly, Elvinia cracked a smirk and joked, "Those women are beautiful. Take them back." "What? Since when did you make jokes?" Zen raised an eyebrow amusedly. Elvinia's cheeks flushed. It was true that she had become quite cheerful in the past 6 months. Sometimes, she'd just blurt out something without thinking first. It suddenly dawned on the women of the fragrant butterfly race that Zen truly didn't have any intention to deal with them, so they heaved a sigh of relief. Fluttering their wings, they prepared to flee. Just as they took off, they heard something whistling through the air. Swish, swish, swish. All of a sudden, sharp green arrows rained from out of nowhere, piercing the women's wings and bodies. In the blink of an eye, the several beautiful women had been shot ruthlessly by countless sharp arrows. Chapter 3111, Black Bear. Creatures from the other shore resembling mole crickets, stood firm and held long bows. They pulled back on their bows and released a wave of sharp arrows. Zen heard the sound behind him and turned towards it. He frowned as he looked on. The arrows weren't aimed at him and Elvinia, but at the women of the fragrant butterfly race instead, killing them all. Once all the arrows had been released, a 10-foot-tall black bear emerged from behind the mole crickets. He stood tall, strong and unmistakably domineering with aggression glowing in his green eyes. "The people of City Guard House are here. Good timing. The City Guard House and the Ghost Scorpion have always been at odds. I doubt they would offer any help to the Ghost Scorpion now." All kinds of creatures from the other shore chimed in their speculations. On the round terrace, souls of light of the bearing race and the sun crow race all smirked when they saw the black bear. If the ghost scorpion was not strong enough to kill Zen, the city guard house should be able to do the trick. The city guard, squeak, sir. Several ear mice bowed respectfully at the sight of the black bear. The city guards were a special force in the myriad spirit city. Many races from the other shore lived here and were constantly engaged in conflicts with one another. Because of this, the city guards had created laws and acquired a considerable amount of strength in order to maintain the peace within the city. The ear mouse race might have been quite powerful in the south of the city, but they still required the city guard house's support and naturally had to show their respect to the black bear. The black bear strode past the bodies of the fragrant butterfly women, paying no attention to the ear mice. He glanced at the dead ghost scorpion lying on the ground and cursed inwardly, useless. He then turned his glare towards Zen and asked, "Was it you who killed the ghost scorpion?" "Yes, it was," replied Zen indifferently. "Do you know what happens to those who commit murder in the myriad spirits city?" The black bear pressed further. Hearing this made the ear mice uneasy. One of the ear mice then raced up to him to explain, "Sir, it's the ghost scorpion that idiot off." The black bear yelled at it impatiently and slapped the giant mouse away, sending it flying into the air. Fortunately, the ear mouse was quick enough to jump off its back and avoid being hit. The black bear had no intention to kill the ear mouse. The giant mouse could bear the power of the bear's slap. Having only a soul of light, the ear mouse, however, was too weak and would have had its soul sent to pieces. The rudeness of the black bear turned Elvinia's face grim. Silently, she lifted the long sword inserted into the ground next to her. Zen's face showed no emotion, but his burning anger could be felt in his aura. "Do you know the consequence of committing the crime of murder?" the black bear asked again. "No, I don't," Zen replied coldly. They were enemies, so Zen had no reason whatsoever to be polite. By the law of the myriad spirit city, the killer should be arrested by the city guard house and sentenced accordingly. "Please come with me to the city guard house," the black bear ordered. The law of the myriad spirit city. Zen put a finger to his chin and looked at the bodies of the fragrant butterfly women. "You had these innocent women killed. According to the law, how should you be punished?" he asked. It had never occurred to the black bear that Zen would fire back with that. His face darkened and he snorted disdainfully. "The city guard house represents the law of the myriad spirit city. So what if I had these women killed?" he said with his head held high. Zen sighed softly. "What you're saying is that the strongest around represents the law of the myriad spirit city. Am I understanding that correctly?" "Exactly," the black bear replied confidently. "Really?" Zen said with a smirk cracking through. "If that's the case, then I'll represent the law here myself." Before the black bear could figure out his meaning, Zen had begun rushing straight towards him. The black bear's green eyes widened when he saw Zen's terrifying speed. Now he understood how the ghost scorpion had been killed by this human. But the ghost scorpion was an underground creature of the other shore. He couldn't compete with the strength of the warriors of the city guard house. The black bear roared ferociously and stretched out a pair of sharp claws, slamming them as he attacked Zen. Zen's only choice was to retreat in order to prevent himself from being smashed into paste. But retreating was not in Zen's nature. He continued rushing towards the black bear, and stretched his own hand out on either side, quick as a bolt of lightning, and clutched the black bear's claws. "What is this?" The black bear's green eyes filled with panic for the first time. Very few creatures within stage 14 of the other shore were a match for him in terms of strength. But the grip of the human felt like he was being held down by two huge iron doors. He just couldn't move an inch from Zen's clutches. Turns out that around 2,300 divine megatons of force is enough to represent the law of myriad spirit city. Zen's words brimmed with disappointment. The black bear gritted his teeth and suddenly lifted both his palms. Not letting go, Zen was hoisted up as well. The black bear turned and placed Zen in front of the mole crickets and roared, "Shoot him to death." The mole crickets were all elite archers of the city guard house. Their green Kylan bows possessed incredible penetrating power. The black bear had expected that even with Zen's super might, he would not be able to dodge the fierce arrows. The last syllable left the black bear's mouth and he was instantly petrified by what he saw. The archers and their bows were all broken to pieces, brown blood flowing among them. Stood beside the piles of fragments, wiping the long sword in her hand clean, was Elvinia. She stared at Zen and said, "Let me test the strength of the law of the myriad spirit city." "Sure, catch." Without a beat, Zen chucked the black bear with another shore power as strong as 3,000 divine megatons. Swish! The black bear flew towards Elvinia. Zen was unable to bring the shade stone liquid onto the other shore when he was at stage 13. His physical strength was extremely limited, and the power that erupted from his body was less than 1,000 divine megatons. It was enough to defeat weak creatures like warriors from the separate abyss race, but in the dark region of stage 13, such strength was far from enough. Even the snake goddess herself probably wouldn't have guessed that the one who would gain the most from reaching the chaotic source realm would be Zen. When truth of powerful holy body wasn't prohibited, wild gods could enhance their bodies with the help of the body-strengthening jade. Truth of powerful holy body was later banned and powerful warriors of the source world could only rely on chaotic source spirits to cultivate their bodies. However, Zen had accidentally brought the chaotic source spirits back to the other shore, leading to his abrupt increase in strength at stage 14. Zen could now easily exert 3,000 divine megatons of force after reaching the chaotic source realm by relying on the other shore power of civilization artifact. If Zen had had such strength in the dark region of stage 13, he wouldn't have been that embarrassed, and he wouldn't have needed Elvinia's help to flee that place. Chapter 3112, Greet Respectfully. Just then, the black bear was sent into the air, feeling as if the world was spinning around him. When he landed, he noticed that he was thrown near that delicate human girl. This excited the creature. Sure, the human man who'd just thrown him into the air was powerful, but there was no way this measly girl could match him. The perfect prey, he thought. What the black bear didn't know was that the girl in his sight was Elvinia, who was frighteningly powerful even when only relying on her physical strength. If Zen hadn't relied on the chaotic source spirits, he wouldn't even be a contender against Elvinia on the other shore. A cold expression flashed in Elvinia's eyes. All of a sudden, she waved the sword in her hand. The hemline of her dress, which was made of light, fluttered and emphasized her gracious figure. Her petite body burst out with immense power, and her skin appeared transparent enough to see the blueness in her veins. Chop! The treasures the Oneness Sky Palace had on stage 14 were too weak, including the sword Elvinia was holding. How could it bear such a powerful strength? As Elvinia struck her sword, the blade broke into hundreds of fragments. Just then, the moon-shaped sword radiance had managed to form. It wrapped around the fragments, and came straight towards the black bear. At first, the black bear was planning to keep the girl hostage and run away. He had no idea that she actually had such immense power that proved to be a lot more intense than the man's. At this point, the black bear was shocked and at the same time, confused about what was happening now. How did these two humans appear in the first place? Phew! In one swift movement, the sword radiance Elvinia slashed out hit the black bear's chest with great precision, slicing him in half. After the job had been done, she lightly tapped the ground and her body retreated instantly, making sure to avoid the black bear's body that was gushing out blood left and right. The area around the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace was usually rowdy and noisy. But at the sight of Elvinia's battle with the bear, the other shore creatures all grew silent, as if they had reached an agreement with each other. On the circular terrace, the souls of light from the bearing race, the divine farmer race, and the sun crow race stood motionless and speechless. They felt bitterness fill their hearts. That Elvinia had entered the chaotic source world the same time as we did. How in the world did she become so powerful when she just entered stage 14? There's no way her strength in the source world can be stronger than mine. What about the other human? The man named Thad, he's very likely to actually be Zen. Do you think he's stronger than you though? Some of these warriors had entered the chaotic source world with Zen and Elvinia, while some had been staying on stage 14 for a long time, like those senior members of the Land of Sword Grief. They had heard about the battle between Zen and the evil god, making them quite knowledgeable of his existence. They were concerned if Zen would be finally killed or not. But to some other shore creatures, now that Zen had killed the black bear, it probably meant something else. There were many other shore races residing in the myriad spirit city. But there were only three forces that could actually control the city, namely the Dark Bear race, the Giants, and the Guide Weasel race. In the past, the Giants had taken absolute control in the myriad spirit city, but now, the powers were divided. In recent years, the Dark Bear race suddenly rose in power. As they grew stronger and won a fierce battle, the city guard house fell into their hands in the end. At this point, the leader of the Dark Bear race became the governor of the city guard house, which made him almost the ruler of the whole myriad spirit city. He said that he could represent the law of the myriad spirit city, and this was no lie. If killing the ghost scorpion could cause a commotion underground in the northern part of the city, then the death of the governor would most probably shake the entire myriad spirit city. Not too far away, 3 members of the Guide Weasel race were filled with excitement, their eyes gleaming. The Guide Weasel race had once been a large group on stage 14, but over the past years, they had struggled to defeat the Dark Bear race. Squeak, squeak, look how the Dark Bear race lost today. Humph, all these years, the Dark Bear race only won because they relied on the support from the upper stages. Now they definitely got what they deserved. What should we do now? Well, it seems like these two humans are very powerful, but they're just passing by stage 14. Maybe we should just support them. I will report to our leader. You two stay here. With a whooshing sound, one of the Guide Weasels rushed out. He transformed into a streak of light and disappeared at the corner of the street. Aside from the guide weasel race, the other shore races also began to move. The news of the city guard house's defeat spread out quickly all throughout the myriad spirit city. Zen took a look at the wooden building, then turned towards the ear mice. This building is too shabby to be the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace, he told them with much concern. Do you have any suggestions about where we can find a better place? At this point, the ear mice were all very giddy. Since the governor of the city guard house was dead, it put an end to the dark bear race's rule over the myriad spirit city. Hence, they would all embrace a new era from today. This place really isn't fit for the Oneness Sky Palace. An ear mouse responded respectfully. I might know a place that could be perfect. The ear mouse smiled, glad that it could help Zen. Well then, please lead the way, Zen said, gesturing towards the ear mouse with his hand. If you two would prefer it, you may take rides on the giant mice. An ear mouse offered in delight. A free ride was so tempting that Zen and Elvinia couldn't refuse. They leapt onto the giant mice and rode them like horses. Though the two giant mice seemed ferocious, they were trained very well by the ear mice. They carried the two humans with utmost caution as they walked steadily out of the small path. Eventually, the group had walked along the widest road in the myriad spirits city and reached the end. Because there were countless races in the city, no matter who was appointed the lord of the city, it would cause a quarrel among the many large races on the other shore. There was no pleasing everyone. Eventually, they had come up with a compromise and accepted the system of the city guard house. And in fact, the governor of the city guard house was the lord of the myriad spirit city. The reason why the black bear was able to rule the city guard house was because he relied mostly on his powerful strength and continuous support from upper stages on the other shore. Without these advantages, the dark bear race were nothing. As Zen and Elvinia headed towards the city guard house, the forces in the myriad spirits city could hardly sit still. Meanwhile, the ear mice had completely taken over the underground cave in the northern area of the city. This was possible only through force. The ear mice got rid of all the creatures that tried to resist, like the tail insect race and the other scorpions. With the help of the giant mice and other mice that had very strong combat abilities in the myriad spirits city, they were able to successfully take over the place. Once the ghost scorpion died, his subordinates were just a group of weaklings. The stench of blood and rottenness filled the entire underground world in the north of the city. At this point, the ear mice had plundered all the savings of the ghost scorpion. When the dark bear race had learned that their leader was murdered, they quickly reacted. They even started to gather the strong warriors of their race to go against Zen and Elvinia. But before they could set out, they were killed by the joint attack of the giants and the guide weasel race. Even the members of the dark bear race that guarded the city guard house had been slaughtered. So when Zen and Elvinia arrived at the entrance of the city guard house riding on the giant mice, the members of the guide weasel race were already there, all lined up to greet them respectfully. The stench of blood still permeated the air. Chapter 3113, The City Guard House. The Myriad Spirits City was an ancient city rich in history which included several hundreds of chaotic eras. Whereas the city guard house's opulence wouldn't be anything worth mentioning in the source world, it was considered to be quite a rare sight on the other shore. Neither the Stage 4 temples nor the Stage 13 strongholds could hold a candle to it. The guide weasel race was known for its intelligence. Once they confirmed that the former city lord was killed, they wasted no time in allying with the giants to eradicate the dark bear race once and for all. However, they didn't dare to steal any of the resources that were kept at the city guard house upon successfully occupying it. They focused on their main goal, controlling the myriad spirit city. They knew that Zen and the Oneness Sky Palace he was representing wouldn't remain in Stage 14. Therefore, there was no need for offending them. That was why the guide weasel race was willing to surrender the city guard house to Zen with utmost sincerity. This dress, it won't fit me. Nor will this one. And this one, Elvinia complained as she picked and chose from a pile of clothing. Ever since her trip to the dark region, she had always robed herself with light-formed attire that couldn't exactly be considered material. She wasn't like Zen whose vague shape could be barely recognized even if he was naked. Although she'd already become more skilled in controlling the great Sanskrit light and the garb she created for herself was enough to cover her decently, she always wanted to find a better solution. There were also some women of the fragrant butterfly race living in the city guard house, and they had many clothes. The only problem was that they were too unsuitable and revealing for her taste. After taking her time going through her options, she finally gave up. Don't worry, Princess Elvinia. We'll ask the servants to tailor dresses for you immediately. It'll only take half a day. A member of the guide weasel race offered before he hurriedly left to give orders. As she threw the revealing clothes onto the floor, Elvinia walked out of the room and headed towards the backyard. There, a myriad of weapons was lined up in an orderly fashion on the ground. As Zen scanned through them, disappointment clouded his eyes. Theoretically, he began to speak, some of the races residing on the other shore descended from those ancient civilizations of the chaos. They must have brought with them their best treasures when they fled to the other shore. So what on earth are these useless scraps we've found here in stage 14? From Zen's perspective, these were nothing but mere scraps of metal. The only ones that provided any real value were the green Kylan bows used by the mole crickets. Supposedly, these were specially made with carefully selected materials by the mole crickets. Zen believed that there were many legendary weapons like the soaring snake sword in the past. To his disappointment, he failed to find any of them in stage 14. Because the guide weasel race was indigenous to the other shore, they hardly knew anything about the chaos and so they couldn't answer any of Zen's questions. An ear mouse moved forward and answered on their behalf. As far as I know, the legendary weapons were obtained only by the most powerful masters. Since they've gone on to the higher stages, it'd be impossible to keep them in stage 14. That's right, another ear mouse agreed. Zen nodded to confirm that he heard them. He never thought getting a decent sword in stage 14 would be this difficult. As he leaned forward to pick up a thin sword to test its weight, Elvinia arrived. He grinned at her before throwing the sword towards her. She swiftly caught and brandished it before snapping it in half with ease. Well, she said with a smile across her face, I guess that sword was too fragile for me to wield. A look of disbelief fell on the faces of the guide weasels that witnessed this scene. Is she aware of the true extent of her power? They thought to themselves. Are we ever going to find swords that are good enough for us here at stage 14? Elvinia grumbled, sounding depressed. A member of the guide weasel race hesitated for a moment before saying, in fact, the Riverside race are very famous weapon refiners who have forged many excellent weapons. However, they all moved to the Sky Water City a few hundred years ago. The Sky Water City, isn't it the city of the Star Falcon race? Zen muttered. He knew the Ghost Scorpion, along with the Black Bear, was asking for trouble under the order of the Star Falcon race. Both the Bering race and the Sun Crow race were determined on killing him, their hostility evident in their revenge which knew no bounds. However, Zen didn't feel worried at all. He suspected that it wouldn't be long before the members of the Star Falcon race themselves would arrive and bring all this chaos upon themselves. Forget it, my friends are still waiting in the source world. It's time for them to return to the other shore, Zen informed with a grin. The land of sword grief was currently full of lower-ranked disciples who were panicking. Things were just fine for those on the second and third floors who usually stayed in the higher stages of the other shore and didn't need to return to stage 14 so frequently. But it was a different story for the disciples on the first floor. Most of them just started their adventure in the Desire World. Their stronghold in stage 14 served as a gathering place just like the stage 4 temples. Unfortunately, with the new disciples' arrival at stage 14, a massive conflict between them and the other shore creatures came. It's all the newcomers' fault. Why did they have to provoke the other shore creatures when they didn't have the power? Now I'll have to remain in stage 15. I can't go back to the stronghold now. You've got better luck than me. I was right outside a stage 14 temple when I left. How will I be able to return to the Myriad Spirit City? I'll certainly be arrested once I arrive at the city gate. Don't blame the other new disciples. We all know that Zen and Princess Elvinia are the ones to blame. It's them you should be confronting regarding all of this, if you have the guts, that is. Zen reached the top of the ranking stone on the first floor in only one day. None of these people would have the ability to challenge him. As for Elvinia, who would dare to confront her, considering her high status? I just want to know how those two are doing, Abdul sighed. Previously, he had been angry with the two of them, but Zen and Elvinia were still members of the Oneness Sky Palace. Though they had physical bodies on the other shore, Abdul couldn't help but wonder if they were strong enough to face the creatures of the other shore. Many of the new disciples stood aside and said nothing. Soon, the deep and heavy feeling in the room became too much to bear. Hyam finally gave in and exclaimed, "Stop worrying. Have some faith in Zen and Princess Elvinia, will you?" That's right, Princess Elvinia can also be considered an other shore creature, right? I'm sure defeating them will be no problem for her, Milo added in agreement with Hyam. Abdul sneered and said, before the truth of powerful holy body was banned, taking on the physical form while roaming the other shore was considered common. However, hardly anyone could defeat those other shore creatures as soon as they reached stage 14. It was no easy feat to improve one's physical form on the other shore. Therefore, it was never a wise decision for any newcomer in stage 14 to become an enemy of the other shore creatures. It wasn't difficult to kill an ordinary tail insect, but the consequences would be unimaginably terrible once the ghost scorpion was involved. Chapter 3114, Confused. While the disciples of the land of sword grief sulked, the door of one of the training rooms suddenly opened. Looking up, they saw Elvina walk out with grace. Though Elvina was someone with special status, her room in the land of sword grief was still in accordance with her ranking. Princess Elvina, she came out. Did she manage to escape? For the senior disciples on the first floor, Elvina was doomed the moment she agreed to face against the ghost scorpion. However, she could still escape since she wasn't obstructed by the soul-binding thread. She could definitely run away at such a critical time. Abdul stepped forward and respectfully cupped his hands. Princess Elvina, how are things going in the Myriad Spirit City? She gave him a cold glare. Everything is fine. Zen just asked me to inform you all that it's safe to go back to the stronghold now. What? We can go back? How is the ghost scorpion? Elvina retained her aloofness and refused to answer any of their questions. The only person she was really nice to was Zen, and that wasn't going to change anytime soon. With her message delivered, Elvina turned around and made her way back, making sure to slam the door in her wake. Princess Elvina, just what on earth happened in the Myriad Spirit City? The disciples continued to hurl their questions at her despite her departure. No matter how loud they shouted though, Elvina did not answer them, preferring solitude in her training room. Now they were even more confused. What should we do? Someone asked. Another disciple shrugged in noncommittal reply. Could they really trust Elvina's words? What if it turned out that the situation in Myriad Spirit City hadn't been dealt with? Entering the other shore rashly could then lead to serious consequences. It would be like courting death. Hyam, however, had already been convinced. Since Princess Elvina said it's been solved, then I guess we can go back now. Milo nodded in agreement. I believe her too. Really, what if Zen was captured and tied by the ghost scorpion who then threatened Elvina to lure us back to the other shore? Abdul muttered in panic. It was a bit far-fetched, but nobody refuted what he said. Everything was possible, and it was their lives that were on the line here. I can go back first and assess the situation for you guys if you want, Dorothy offered. Everyone's eyes landed on her. I'll go with you, Hyam said. There's nothing to be afraid of, Milo told them. Several warriors had a good relationship with Zen and trusted him unconditionally. They believed that he would never let them walk into such a dangerous trap. Dorothy followed through with her offer, sitting down and leaning against the wall of the bronze palace. When she was about to enter the other shore, Abdul suddenly arrived to stop her. Don't do it. Look, Dorothy, you're young and noble. I'm not going to let you take the risk. He exchanged a look with Hyam, who only nodded. Both Dorothy and Elvina had special status. If anything bad happened to them, it would mean great trouble for the land of sword grief. To Abdul, there was only one person who could enter the other shore and check the situation. That look was enough to tell Hyam all that Abdul wanted to say. I'll go first then, Hyam said. Like Dorothy, Hyam made himself comfortable while sitting on the ground before activating the Truth of Eternal Sword Intent. Buzz. In the blink of an eye, Hyam was once again back on the other shore. He made his way into the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold and found nothing. There was only a little bloodstain on the outside path. What happened? Just as he was racking his brains for an answer, someone asked, You are the disciple from the Oneness Sky Palace, aren't you? When Hyam turned, he found a giant mouse standing not far away from him. On the back of the giant mouse sat a soul of light of an ear mouse. Hyam recognized the ear mouse as Soul of Light immediately, having seen them in the chaotic source world before. Yes. Do you know what happened here? Why did you come here alone? Where are the other disciples? The ear mouse asked, not really answering his question. Zen told the ear mouse that there were over 100 new disciples it would have to bring to the city guard house. Hyam felt a bit embarrassed to tell the ear mouse that nobody wanted to come to the other shore since they were scared, so he settled for a little white lie. They'll be here soon. Let me just go back and get them. He left the other share with some urgency. Meanwhile, Abdul and the others kept staring at Hyam's body with bated breath, scared that he would suddenly drop dead at any moment. They all breathed a sigh of relief when he finally opened his eyes. Hyam, they exclaimed once he got back. How was the situation? Abdul asked. It's all right. There was nothing except bloodstains on the ground. What about Zen and Princess Elvina? Abdul continued. Dorothy's eyes flickered in fear. She wholeheartedly believed in Zen, but she couldn't help but be worried for him. I didn't see them. There was an ear mouse waiting at the scene though, and it told me to bring everyone back to the other shore, Hyam replied, narrating to everyone what he saw. His news was met with confusion. It didn't really tell them what happened in the Myriad Spirit City. You don't have to go in if you're afraid. The new disciples can go with me to the other shore. I promise everything will be fine, Hyam assured everyone before entering the other shore once more. The aforementioned new disciples knew Zen and had confidence in him. They readily followed Hyam to the other shore, believing him wholeheartedly. Abdul could only sigh in resignation. It was a risk, but it seemed they were going to have to take it. He turned to the others. Let's go. Judging from his tone, it was evident that he was ready to risk everything. The senior disciples of the land of sword grief followed, sitting cross-legged in order to enter the other shore. Buzz. More and more souls of light appeared within the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold as everyone arrived. Abdul was the first to walk out the stronghold and saw the ear mouse Hyam had mentioned earlier. The ear mouse let out a squeak as it regarded the new arrivals. It seems everyone has arrived safely. Please come with me. Abdul's brows furrowed in confusion. Come with you, he repeated. Where? However, the ear mouse wasn't going to give him a straight answer. You'll know when we get there. There wasn't anything abnormal in front of the stronghold, but Abdul and the senior disciples couldn't help but remain uneasy with their surroundings. Then again, the moment Abdul decided to come back here, he had already decided to risk everything. Thus, he followed the ear mouse. If something bad burst out suddenly, then Abdul was ready to get out of the other shore and never venture into it ever again. The senior disciples followed Abdul's lead, walking out of the small path and heading towards the wide road. Unbeknown to them, the shocking news of what had taken place in the Myriad Spirits City already spread like wildfire. The matter about the Oneness Sky Palace was made known to the many races of the other shore. As the human souls of light traversed the road, they were not met with the usual scorn or contempt. Instead, the races of the other shore treated them with a hint of reverence. Chapter 3115, Sitting on the Top. Abdul, what's wrong with those other shore creatures? Why are they staring at us like that? A senior disciple from the land of sword grief asked in a low register, feeling uncomfortable under the gaze. But even Abdul was baffled. Normally, they had to be extra careful when going in and out of the Myriad Spirit City. The other shore creatures had always been arrogant, given their great strength. Usually, they only had contempt in their eyes upon seeing them. But today, their eyes were completely different. It was as though there was even some kind of awe in them. Were they suddenly afraid of the souls of light? Abdul and his companions had yet to realize that it wasn't the souls of light they were afraid of. They would soon find out that they acted like this because Zen and Elvenia had occupied the city guard house. On the way there, everyone was feeling quite uneasy. Soon, they reached the end of the road at the gate of a magnificent building. The city guard house. Abdul was rather stunned as he stood in front of the structure. Has Zen provoked the members of the city guard house? Were we brought here for them to kill? A worried voice came from one of the senior disciples. For a moment, Abdul was about to agree to the thought, but on second thought, he realized that it wasn't a very logical conclusion. The Oneness Sky Palace was known to always follow the rules. They even paid their tributes to the city guards every year. It was highly unlikely for them to have provoked the people of the city guard house. Besides, Zen was standing up against the ghost scorpion, who had always been at odds with the city guard house, anyway. Could the city guard house have saved Zen and Princess Elvenia? Abdul wondered after giving it a thought. After thinking it through, he shared the possibility with those around him. That must be the case. The city guard house has always wanted to kill the ghost scorpion, hasn't it? But the creature has always been hiding in the underground in the north of the city. When he attacked Zen and alerted the city guard house, they must have taken the chance to kill him. Zen is so lucky. Unexpectedly, a warrior beside him suddenly chimed in, but even if the city guard house killed the ghost scorpion, why would they invite us here? Now, Abdul was stumped. The city guard house had real control of the Myriad Spirits City. They normally paid no mind to the souls of light from the Oneness Sky Palace. What could have gotten them invited to the city guard house? Don't think too much. The city guard house won't kill recklessly like the ghost scorpion anyway. Unable to figure it out, Abdul ended up dropping it. They then entered the city lord's mansion. On either side of the mansion stood a dozen giants, motionless like iron towers. As the group continued moving forward, they saw the members of the guide weasel race standing on both sides. All these other shore creatures were the elites of their races. Their very aura was strong, especially coupled with their fierce and bold appearance. Normally, they were considered mighty warriors of the myriad spirits city, but at this moment, they were merely serving as guards of the city guard house. The grand scene before them had Abdul and the rest rather frightened, doubt growing within them. While the city guard house had always been controlled by the dark bear race, they hadn't spotted any of them. Entering the main hall, Abdul looked up at the very top of the hall. Just as he got ready to bow, his entire body froze still. The other senior disciples of the land of sword grief were also dumbfounded. Sitting upright on the very top of the main hall was none other than Zen. Beside him was Elvinia, wearing a bored expression. In front of her was a long, black table that had various dishes and fruits. It was a feast. She picked up a fruit and popped it in her mouth, staring at Abdul and the rest with cold eyes. Princess Elvinia. Finally, Abdul managed to call her name with great respect. It had taken a minute for him to come back to his senses. Although Elvinia held special status, the warriors in the land of sword grief were also arrogant and proud in front of her. They paid their respects to her merely because of her noble birth. But the way Abdul had just addressed her seemed genuine. Zen, on the other hand, although they couldn't quite see all his features, they were sure that it was Zen sitting there. They could hardly believe it. How could he take that seat? Only the governor of the city guard house, one who controlled the myriad spirits city, was qualified to sit on that chair. Everyone, don't be so stiff, Zen said with an easy smile. Zen, what's going on? In his confusion, Abdul managed to ask. Nothing, Elvinia said simply as she stuffed a dark red fruit into her mouth. Her mouth crushed the cold, soft pulp, making a faint, fruity fragrance. The food on the other shore might not be much better than that in the source world, but it sure had a unique taste. We have killed the ghost scorpion, and the city guard house has arrived to give us some trouble. I guess the Bearing race and the Sun Crow race are behind this. The city guard house came with trouble. Abdul and the rest could feel their hearts tremble in their shock. But we've also killed the governor of the city guard house, so this place now belongs to us, Elvinia added nonchalantly. This didn't bother many of the newcomers. It was their first time in the Desire World, after all. They couldn't yet fathom how fierce the fights among the other shore creatures were. But Abdul and the other senior disciples were clearly baffled by Elvinia's casual remarks. On their way there, a strange feeling had already come over them. Now, thinking about how the other shore creatures looked at them in awe, they realized that those eyes were not for them, but for Zen and Elvinia. So this city guard house belongs to us now? Hyam had a smile coming on as he asked. Yes, this will be the new stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace. That old wooden building was far too shabby, Zen said pleasantly. So, you don't need to feel restrained here. The new disciples finally sighed in relief. Zen could ensure their safety, anyway. It was a good thing that this place had become the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold. Abdul and the other senior disciples of the land of sword grief, however, still felt like they were in a dream. Just then, an ear mouse stepped into the main hall of the city guard house and bowed to Zen, who remained sitting at the very top. The savings of the ghost scorpion have all been recorded. There are 500 finger-sized chunks of soul crystal, 520 body-strengthening jades and 20,000 soul pills. Apart from that, for so many years, the ghost scorpion had occupied the northern part of the city. Of course, he had accumulated many things. Once the ghost scorpion died, his subordinates took many things away from his lair when they fled, but a good portion of things was still left underground. The ear mice also moved quite fast. Within an hour after the ghost scorpion died, they had already made their way into the underground of the northern part of the city, plundering all the remaining treasures. The amount of savings reported by the ear mouse had everyone shocked, save for Zen, who merely waved his hand and said, "You don't have to report every detail. All these things will be shared equally between your race and our Oneness Sky Palace." Shared equally? Abdul exclaimed in shock. The ghost scorpion's legacy was so great that half of it was already amazing. And to think that Zen easily gave that half to the ear mice, Abdul couldn't help but stammer, "Zen, since you are the one who killed the ghost scorpion, his legacy naturally belongs to you, as well as the land of sword grief. It doesn't make sense for you to share it with the ear mice like this. It's beyond generous." Chapter 3116, Leaders of the Two Races. Naturally, Abdul didn't want Zen to be too generous. According to the rules of the land of sword grief, if one gained something on the other shore, part of the harvest was to be handed over to the Heavenly Palace's stronghold as a reserve, after all. But Zen cast a cold glare at Abdul and sneered, "The land of sword grief. I wonder what its disciples were doing when the ghost scorpion came." There was no denying it. The warriors of the land of Sword Grief were mostly cowards, hiding in the source world, never daring to even enter the other shore. While all of you went into hiding, the ear mouse race tried to persuade the ghost scorpion not to make a move against me. Once I killed him, it was the ear mice, once again, that took the initiative to head underground. Don't you think it's only reasonable to share the harvest with them? Zen sharply asked in return. The ear mice were filled with gratitude upon hearing Zen's defense. Although they didn't manage to stop the ghost scorpion, Zen was clearly grateful for their effort. It was all Abdul could do to clench his jaw and grit his teeth. Well, speaking of which, Princess Elvinia has also offered her help. She's a member of our heavenly palace, so, as the daughter of Eastern Emperor Tai, Elvinia had a share of responsibilities in such matters. But she blatantly ignored Abdul's insistence. After taking her time to bite into a berry and savor the fruit, she looked indifferent as she said, "All the credit goes to Zen. I didn't do anything." Out of excuses, Abdul finally retreated and bowed his head. On the other side, the ear mouse race handled the matters in the underground world of the northern part of the city. Just as they finished up, two other creatures, one tall and one short, entered the hall. The tall one happened to be the leader of the giants, Raoul, while the short one, Clyde, led the guide weasel race. This time, it was under the order of these two leaders that the two major races joined hands and destroyed the Dark Bear race. Not only had they dealt with members of the Dark Bear race in the city guard house, but the entire base of the race in the south was also completely wiped out. In terms of strength, the Dark Bear race was inferior to the long-standing giant race and guide weasel race. It was the head of the Dark Bear race that had managed to make rapid progress as an individual, suppressing the two older races and taking control of the city guard house. As the two leaders gave their introductions politely, Abdul hid his shock. Even the leaders of the major races of the Myriad Spirits City were greatly respectful to Zen. What the latter had said should be true, Abdul thought. "Masters, what can't do for you?" Zen asked calmly. "Squeak, I've joined hands with the giants to gather all the treasures the Dark Bear race has managed to gather over the years. We'd like to offer this to you as tribute. I hope you'll find it satisfying," said Clyde, throwing a wink to one of his men. The latter pulled out a list and handed it to Zen respectfully. After giving the list a quick glance, Zen handed it to Elvinia. The amount of wealth and treasure they had gained from occupying the Myriad Spirits City was truly beyond Zen's imagination. "Sir, may know whether you'll settle down in the Myriad Spirits City or if you'll be leaving stage 14 of the other shore after improving your cultivation?" Clyde asked clearly and carefully. That was what he and Raoul had come for, after all. Even if the city guard house served as the Oneness Sky Palace's stronghold, it had no bearing on the creatures of the other shore. What mattered most to the guide weasel race and the giant race was whether or not they could control the Myriad Spy-immense city. Since Zen wasn't from the other shore and was soon to leave stage 14, the chance to take control of the Myriad Spirits City seemed to be within reach more than ever. Staying in the Myriad Spirits City. After a moment of thought, Zen nodded. "Now that sounds like a good idea." Hearing that, Clyde and Raoul exchanged a look, a bitter expression coming over them. If Zen really intended to take control of the Myriad Spirits City, it wouldn't end up well for them. They would have to handle Zen instead of the Dark Bear race. Seeing the leaders' faces, Zen smiled faintly. "But we are not creatures from the other shore, anyway. Only by improving our cultivation level can we get what we really want. It's impossible for us to stay here forever. Taking care of this city isn't something I'm particularly good at. If you're willing to do me the favor, I'll be truly grateful." Suddenly, Clyde's and Raoul's eyes flashed, their frowns turning into smiles. Clyde even clasped his hands together like a human and said, "If that's what you want, the guide weasel race will be at your service." Many benefits came along with managing a large city, and they were all aware of the fact. But it was unrealistic to leave Zen or the Land of Sword Grief disciples in charge of the entire city. It was the best strategy for the two major races to assist Zen in management. Breaking his silence, Raoul suddenly chimed in softly, "As far as I know, the Dark Bear race has an inexorable connection with the Star Falcon race from the Skywater City. Now that we've cleared out the Dark Bear race, I'm afraid the Star Falcon race will come to challenge us. I wonder if you have any idea how to deal with it, sir." The Dark Bear race was, in fact, established with the Star Falcon race's help. Both the Guide Weasel race and the Giant race were well aware of it. Now that the Dark Bear race had been wiped out, the stronger Star Falcon race was likely to seek revenge. If they went straight for the Myriad Spirits City when Zen and his team had already withdrawn from the other shore, the Guide Weasel race and the Giant race would be in deep trouble, left alone in battle. Hearing the news, Zen looked at the ear-mouse race with inquisitive eyes. While Zen could probably figure out the relationship between the races himself, he knew that the information from the ear-mouse race was probably the most reliable when it came to a secret alliance like this. Squeak, the ghost scorpion took action against you because the Star Falcon race gave the order in secret. But after the ghost scorpion's death, they asked the Dark Bear race to take action right away, explained an ear-mouse. The Star Falcon has a very good relationship with the Sun Crow race. The four strong races, the Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race, the Sun Crow race, and the New Moon race, are all settled in the Sky Water City, the Star Falcon's base. I see, Zen nodded as something cold seeped into his eyes. I must go to the Sky Water City to have a look. But if the Star Falcon race dares to come, it would be for the best. Please rest assured, Masters, before leave stage 14, will wipe out the entire Star Falcon race. The moment Zen entered the Desire World, the Bearing race, the Sun Crow race, and the other races fought hard to suppress him. He wasn't going to let them off so easily. If you head for the Sky Water City, you can be sure that the Guide Weasel race will help you as much as we can. The Giant race would all be at your service as well. If Zen attacked the Sky Water City and took control of it, both races would benefit greatly. Over the next few days, the resources left by the Dark Bear race and the Ghost Scorpion were continuously sent to the city guard house. Abdul wanted to help Zen put them away because he believed he was responsible for all the resources in the land of Sword Grief on stage 14. But Zen readily refused him, handing the important task to Hyam instead. Meanwhile, in the depth of the Phoenix Palace, Lady Flamen was resting by the side of Eastern Emperor Tai, in front of whom a soul jade slip was floating. Once he read the information on the slip, he felt torn between laughing and crying. Your Majesty, what is recorded on the soul jade slip? Why are you so upset? Asked Lady Flamen curiously. Taking the slip from the air and handing it to her, the Emperor smiled, have a look for yourself. You'll know why. Furrowing her brows, Flamen examined the slip and began immersing herself in the information written on it. A few moments later, Flamen's eyes lit up. She smiled helplessly, just as Eastern Emperor Tai did. So, Zen and Elvenia managed to occupy the Myriad Spirits City so easily. Chapter 3117, The Sclerite. The Myriad Spirits City was a place with a long, colorful history. After all, it had existed longer than the present round of chaos. Both Flamen and Eastern Emperor Tai had traveled across the Desire World and passed by the Myriad Spirits City. They were rather weak during that time. They faced much more powerful beings from the other shore and had to swallow all the insults and live in silence, just like other feeble creatures. Therefore, they had never thought that Zen and Elvenia would have occupied the Myriad Spirits City as soon as they entered the Desire World. Those two youngsters are more ambitious than I was, Eastern Emperor Tai mused with a faint smile. Flamen blinked a few times before she anxiously said, the Element Spirit race is currently the dominant race on the other shore, while many races from the Source World such as the Bearing race and the Sun Crow race control the different stages of the other shore, respectively. Since Elvenia and Zen did such big acts, I'm afraid those races would take revenge on them. HMPH. Even if they didn't commit such acts, they still might be attacked, Eastern Emperor Tai said coldly. I'm only afraid that the ruler of stage 14th of the other shore would do something against Elvenia. I'm not afraid of anything else. Without a doubt, Elvenia's successful rise into the Desire World was great news for the Oneness Sky Palace. After all, a purified being who could grow was terrifying. The Bearing race and the Sun Crow race would definitely regard her as a thorn in their flesh. With her strength as a purified being, however, she had no reason to be afraid of ordinary creatures on the other shore, or even powerful creatures in the dark region. She could easily melt all of them with her great Sanskrit light. Yet, there was a ruler in charge of the dark region in each stage, starting from stage 14 of the other shore. It would be rather troublesome if Elvenia confronted such a ruler. So, I'll send a message to the two young ones and tell them to be careful, said Flamen with a nod. All right, Eastern Emperor Tai agreed as his eyes glimmered with deep light. Now, it's almost time to have a showdown. I hope that they can both grow up quickly and rise to a higher stage. In that case, maybe they can help the Oneness Sky Palace. A smile graced Flamen's face. They will definitely be able to help the Oneness Sky Palace. As of now, Elvenia has reached the suitable age for marriage. Your Majesty, will you arrange a marriage for her? She said. It could be said that Elvenia had become a purified being because of Zen. As for Zen, he was in no way inferior to Elvenia's potential on the other shore. However, Eastern Emperor Tai still hadn't figured out how Zen had sent his corporeal body to the other shore, until now. Apparently, Eastern Emperor Tai had secretly observed Zen. He had faintly sensed the unique truth of godly way from Zen's body, but he had never felt such an aura of the truth of godly way from anybody else. Thus, he couldn't find any clue at all. Haven't I told you, everybody has his or her destined mate? Now that Zen already has wives and a child, how can he satisfy Elvinia? Eastern Emperor Tai asked back. I had a long talk with Elvinia after she got back from the chaotic source world. I'm sure she's satisfied with Zen. As her mother, of course I have to help her on the matter. We don't need to attach so much importance to her status, but... But what? Asked Eastern Emperor Tai. I've heard that the old lady's granddaughter also likes Zen. I'm afraid, Flamen calmly explained, her lips curving into a slight frown. Yasmin was a powerful figure who was second only to Eastern Emperor Tai in the Oneness Sky Palace. She, however, had a strange temper. Only a few people from the other mountains liked her. Moreover, they had a conflict last time when they were in the Vastness Mountain. That instance made Flamen dislike Yasmin even more. You mean Dorothy? Eastern Emperor Tai questioned. There was an instance when Yasmin had mentioned some of Dorothy's secrets to Eastern Emperor Tai. She had painstakingly cultivated and raised Dorothy for many years, who was considered as the apple of her eye. Eastern Emperor Tai always had a headache at the thought of the stubborn Yasmin. I'll find a chance to sound out Yasmin's opinion, said Eastern Emperor Tai with a wry smile. He had never thought that his outstanding daughter would have to compete with another girl for a husband. Meanwhile, the land of Sword Grief had been peaceful for a few days. All the disciples struggled to contain their uncontrollable excitement. Our Oneness Sky Palace can finally hold our heads high on the other shore. Occupying a large city is really something I had never dared to think of. You guys on the second floor. Do you want to come down and have a look? Ha ha ha. The last comment didn't actually mean to go down from the second floor to the first floor, but rather from the higher stages of the other shore to stage 14. Although many disciples on the first floor had nothing to do with occupying the Myriad Spirit City, they still felt honored. Many of the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace scurried back from stage 15, stage 16, and even stage 17 of the other shore. They all wanted to witness the grand occasion in the Myriad Spirit City. At the same time, Zen was so generous that he intended to distribute a part of what he had gained among the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace previously. Zen knew that he could get more resources and support from the Oneness Sky Palace after he entered the land of Sword Grief. And, he understood that many disciples had contributed to those resources. Although he didn't like what Abdul had said, he still thought that he had to give something in return after he had stayed in the Oneness Sky Palace for a long time. Once he had finished his tasks, he moved his soul to the Myriad Spirit City. Then, he went on a short-term seclusion after he had exited the other shore. Even though he had shown his mighty strength in the Myriad Spirit City, he clearly knew that the other shore was definitely not as simple as it looked. The creatures in the light region might not compare to him and Elvinia, but what about those in the dark region? Besides, there might be another purified being in the dark region in stage 14. Therefore, the purpose of his cultivation in seclusion this time was to refine the 6-pattern blood-storing seed he had acquired from the snake goddess. In the secluded cultivation room, Zen held in his palm the seed that emitted blue light. If I refine the 6-pattern blood-storing seed, will Chiyu's bloodline disappear completely? He asked number 9527 with a bit of hesitation. He simply wanted to obtain more blood of the Chaos Ancient God in order to become stronger, but he was still a member of the 9 Li race. If he eliminated all traces of his original bloodline, then he would no longer have any blood connection with the 9 Li race. Hey, there's nothing to worry about. The 6-pattern blood-storing seed will not change your bloodline. It can only copy blood. When you have copied enough blood of my master, the sclerite on your chest will continue to grow. You can store the extra blood in the sclerite, number 9527 answered. The sclerite. When Zen had merged with the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline for the first time, a sclerite started to grow on his chest. Number 9527 had previously hid inside the sclerite, and the truth crystal had come out from it as well. Since then, he had never had the chance to procure any more blood of the Chaos Ancient God, so the sclerite didn't grow. Now that it was unnecessary for him to worry about his original bloodline, he didn't hesitate anymore. He gently tossed the 6-pattern blood-storing seed and made it float in front of his chest. He then put his palms over his chest, which activated the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline. Green light gathered around his hands, and a truth crystal gradually took shape. It wasn't difficult for him to refine the 6-pattern blood-storing seed. The snake goddess had simply given him some instructions, which he had always kept in mind. Chapter 3118, Transformation. As the truth crystal turned solid, Zen waved his hand at it. It began to dissipate into a green eddy. Zen gently hooked one of his fingers, then it turned into a stream of energy and dashed toward the 6-pattern blood-storing seed. There were 6 cracks on the surface of the seed, hence the name. The energy merged with the seed, slowly seeping through the cracks and flowing into the seed. The azure blue light of the seed gradually faded, replaced by a cyan green light. The seed now contained the bloodline of the Chaos Ancient God. The power of the bloodline is so strong. Zen's eyes showed a hint of surprise. It was no wonder the 6-pattern blood-storing seed was extremely precious in the source world. Any bloodline could be directly copied by the seed once it was absorbed. It was a truly amazing ability. What a fascinating object, exclaimed No. 9527. Zen reached out his hand and pointed at the seed. At this, the seed promptly darted straight into his open mouth. It felt strange to swallow the seed after the bloodline had fused into it. But Zen just followed what the snake goddess told him to do. At first, nothing happened after Zen swallowed the seed. But soon, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. Zen could see that the seed had unfurled in his belly. In the middle of the seed, a green ball of light had started to glow. Each time a beam of light burst out, he felt a burst of sharp pain. The green light was the power of Gerald's bloodline. The power of the bloodline soon seeped into Zen's internal organs. It flowed, almost consciously, along the meridians in his body, gathering in his chest. A small sclerite began to grow out from the area. The second sclerite, as number 9527 said this, more sclerites started to grow on Zen's chest, as more of Gerald's bloodline gathered there. The 6-pattern blood-storing seed allowed one to inherit all the power of the bloodline from the previous generation, just like Zen and Yan inherited the bloodlines of Chiyu and the snake goddess. Thus, Zen was inheriting the complete power of the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline. The pain in his stomach grew more intense as the power continued to flow through his internal organs and gather at his chest. The third sclerite started to grow. The sclerites emerged one by one from Zen's chest, down to his lower ribs. Then they started to grow at his waist. 10 sclerites, 20, 30, the sclerites started to emerge from his spine, going up until they grew around his neck. The sclerites cut through Zen's insides, causing immense pain. But he was able to tolerate it. Through the whole ordeal, Zen kept a poker face. A flicker of fear crossed his features, however, as the sclerites started to grow in his head. He was used to seeing strange appendages on a human body, but the head was the most vital part. An accident could cause irreversible damage. If these sclerites damaged his head, it could destroy him. Don't be afraid. This is just what happens when you absorb a bloodline. Just remember, even the bloodline of Chiyu could not hurt you, let alone these sclerites, number 9527 said, encouragingly. He was right. Zen once had 3 heads and 6 arms, and it did not cause any damage to his body. They grew quite naturally. Realizing this, Zen stopped worrying. He calmed down and let the sclerites grow in his head. The sclerites grew in a manner so precise that although they cut through his flesh and skull, they avoided all the vital parts, therefore not causing any substantial damage. With Zen's strong ability to recover, the ruptured flesh quickly healed and wrapped around the new sclerites. After the sclerites had emerged in Zen's head, the sclerites in his arms and legs started to grow. An hour later, the green light of the 6-pattern blood-storing seed finally dimmed. The sclerites also stopped growing. There are 861 sclerites in total. Zen counted, using his inner vision. He stood up and tried to move his body, but almost instantly fell to the ground. These new sclerites still felt strange and uncomfortable. You'll feel better once you get used to them. These sclerites have greatly enhanced your body, number 9527 remarked. Zen suddenly remembered how, in the chaotic source world, Mount was so powerful, almost invincible. Even the evil god, who had absorbed the power of many bloodlines, was unable to kill him. Mount had the power of the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline, and his body was strong enough to match a warrior in the chaotic source realm. He was a human being on the outside, but the structure inside his body was totally different from normal people. Now Zen was just like him. Zen walked back and forth in the cultivation room, adjusting to his new body structure. Soon enough, he began to grow accustomed to it. He started to run and jump. He adapted very quickly. It wasn't long before he was using those sclerites as if he was born with them. The sclerites on both sides of the stomach protect the elixir field well. Those on the legs bring greater support, boosting the legs, power. Interesting. These sclerites did not grow randomly, but in a way that perfectly enhanced my body. Zen stopped moving with a satisfied look on his face. Of course, my master is perfect, otherwise, he would not have made it from the last chaos to this one, number 9527 pointed out, matter-of-factly. I want to try the truth level Thurgy. Zen stretched his arms, and the 861 new sclerites inside his body responded accordingly. The power of a single truth crystal was indeed not enough. But Zen was now able to mobilize all the sclerites in his body. His entire body was filled with the bloodline from the Chaos Ancient God. He was no longer the same as before. Wait, before number 9257 could stop him, Zen already activated all the sclerites. A strange scene unfolded. Chapter 3119, The Other Shore Key. All of the golden blood around Zen's body started to circulate, and the sclerites continued to unfold. His hands instantly became much thicker and stronger. The sclerites on his back broke through his skin, turning into sharp thorns. Meanwhile, the sclerite at the end of his backbone spread out completely and extended into a strong tail. The tail was similar to that of the ghost scorpion on the other shore. There was even a black needle embedded on its end. What happened to me? Why did I change into this? He complained. He awkwardly stood there like a fool as he observed the changes in his body. On the other hand, number 9527 and the regal jade spirit were used to the change of form. After all, they knew that the physical body was just a vessel. Zen, however, was still unable to accept it at the moment. If he had 3 heads and 6 arms, at least he maintained the human shape, but now he was like a monster. It's normal to change into the form of the Chaos Ancient God. Don't forget that my master, Gerald, is actually a huge scorpion. In the last round of chaos, he belonged to the spiritual scorpion civilization, number 9527 comforted him. Zen had previously seen Gerald's initial appearance in the illusion created by the snake goddess, which was in the form of a huge scorpion. Still, he didn't expect himself to turn into a scorpion. He thought for a while, and then a helpless smile graced his lips. You were right, I will not show my strange appearance in front of others, he declared. He unfolded his hands again, and the green vortex began to gather between his thick palms. Square truth crystals appeared between his hands and quickly accumulated in the vortex. As he placed his hands above his head, a bright green star was formed. Despite his efforts to suppress it, it was already 1,000 times more powerful than the previous falling star palm. If the star fell, the training room would probably be destroyed completely. Thus, he was careful not to drop it. The energy aura of truth level the vortex had released carried a strong penetrating power. The Land of Swordgrief's training room could block most of the energy aura, but no one expected that someone had cultivated the truth level Thurgy inside it during the time it had been designed. Even the disciples on the first floor had sensed the energy aura. They were utterly surprised when they felt it. What's going on in the first room? What kind of energy aura is that? Why can't the array of the training room block it? It's so strange. The array of the training room was designed by a great master. But why? Although they were confused, they didn't dare enter the training room to check what happened. Nevertheless, they became more curious about Zen. The energy aura lasted for only 9 seconds. Zen had absorbed all the energy in the vortex into the sclerites. At the same time, all the sclerites turned over and shrank back. He reverted back to the human form in the blink of an eye, and all the blood power of the Chaos Ancient God had returned inside the sclerites. To tell the truth, Zen could also use the Chaos Ancient God's blood power even if he didn't activate his form. But if he wanted to try his best, he did have to turn into the strange appearance, which was like a scorpion. Now that he had a complete set of blood power, he could continue to cultivate Gerald's Thurgy. The falling star palm was just Gerald's basic Thurgy, but the way the truth crystals would be utilized in the future was up to no. 9527. Yet, at that point, Zen found that something was wrong with the 6-pattern blood-storing seed he had swallowed. The 6-pattern blood-storing seed is supposed to disappear after being refined, but why did this happen? He asked curiously. Naturally, he was confused. The originally unfolded seed had fully divided into 2 parts inside his body. Between those 2 parts floated countless lines of various lengths. At that moment, his eyebrows suddenly shot up to his forehead. These lines are the same as those of the other shore key. As he thought about it for a little while, the 6-pattern blood-storing seed that he had swallowed before went up along his belly, and then he spat it out. After he had refined the 6-pattern blood-storing seed, the inside of the seed was completely empty. When he placed the two parts of the seed together, those lines appeared again. Apart from copying bloodline, does the seed have any other uses? Just then, his eyes immediately flashed. As he recalled the snake goddess reaction that day, he remembered that she had shown a rare, hesitant look when they discussed the matter of the 6-pattern blood-storing seed. If it could only be used to carry the blood power, the snake goddess shouldn't have reacted like that. The thought of it made him even more interested in those lines. He stretched out his hand and flipped on the space ring, and a divine crystal appeared in his palm. Then, with a pinch of his hand, the divine crystal was shattered and the internal energy flowed onto the lines. Buzz! A beam of pale blue light glowed, and the divine crystal had finally activated the other shore key. A map appeared, along with a Sanskrit word. It's true that there is another shore key inside this small 6-pattern blood-storing seed. It's amazing, Zen could not help but shout. Not only Zen but also number 9527 couldn't understand that. In the past few years, the Pear Hill had closely protected the 6-pattern blood-storing tree so that the outsiders couldn't reach it. Only Fuxi and the snake goddess in the whole source world knew the secrets contained in the seeds. At first, the snake goddess didn't want to hand over the 6-pattern blood-storing seed, but over the past few years, there was no important information discovered from the seeds. Of course, it made Fuxi and the snake goddess disappointed. After all, the last seed was hung on the tree as their beacon of hope. They had never picked it off, and at last they gave it to Zen. They didn't expect that there was another shore key hidden in the last seed. Zen carefully protected the seed, and then sent it into his inner world to let Jeffrey decipher it. By now, Jeffrey was quite familiar with such things. After he had deciphered the Sanskrit word on the other shore key, he said, "Stage 17 of the other shore." Since Zen now had the map and also knew that the temple was located on stage 17 of the other shore, it would be easy for him to accurately confirm its position. The other words Jeffrey had said seemed to be meaningless, but they were similar to the truth of godly way. With those words, he could bring the other shore key straight to the other shore. Fortunately, he had done something similar on stage 1 of the other shore. Stage 17 of the other shore, he said as his eyes narrowed slightly. Stage 17 was not far from stage 14. His current abilities could allow him to dash there in a snap. But, why was another shore key of stage 17 hidden in the 6-pattern blood-storing seed? Who had put this key inside? What did it have to do with the Pear Hill? After Zen settled down in stage 14 of the other shore, he decided to investigate this matter. Chapter 3120, Invitation. In stage 29 of the other shore, a giant golden-winged bird soared graciously in the air, spreading out the aura of ferocity. Such golden-winged birds named Garudas might as well be considered the #1 predator of the food chain in this stage. Most creatures on the other shore in Souls of Light would flinch and dodge every time they came across one. The Garuda hovered over a cliff that had a sunken path. Though the path had existed for quite some time, no one knew how or when it was made. At the end of the path was a soul of light, who had a pair of wings spread out behind the back. They resembled the wings of the demon women in the divine lair, except they were larger and more powerful. It was Elizabeth, head of the divine lair. Before these two had set foot into the Desire World, I had asked help from the Star Falcon race. I wanted them to use all their resources and facilities to kill them, she began explaining. However, we failed and the Dark Bear race was wiped out. Previously, she had been too impatient in dealing with Zen in the chaotic source world, which had led to much downfall. After that experience, she knew not to act so rashly again. She had to remain calm in order to win. But her calmness did not mean surrendering. She had a plan, and she was going to push through with it no matter what. However, Zen had shown a great amount of strength the moment he entered the Desire World. He was sure to pose a great threat to her race and their allies. Humph, we should not have relied on the Sun Crow race in the first place. The person beside Elizabeth spewed out. This person was one of the 5-element emissaries of the Bearing race, the Earth Emissary. Elizabeth's face darkened at the sound of this. How can you blame the Sun Crow race for this? The two humans are too powerful. One of them is a purified being. The Earth Emissary gasped, a purified being. How did this purified being even set foot into the Desire World? You might be dreaming. There was no way the Earth Emissary was going to buy it. When the word spread about Elvenia, they had already speculated that she was a purified being from the very beginning. She was the daughter of Eastern Emperor Tai, but she suddenly reappeared on the other shore with a clear appearance. Her being a purified being was the only reasonable explanation for this to happen. But her presence in the desire world had confused everyone, including Elizabeth. It was of common knowledge that purified beings could not roam around all stages, because they were rulers of particular stages. If she had managed to enter the desire world, that would only be possible if she wasn't a purified being. This drove everyone to wonder and debate over her true identity. This is not important, Elizabeth snapped. What's important is their strength. I should ask the Star Falcon race to act soon. The Star Falcon race resided in the Skywater City, and proved to be the strongest race in Stage 14. And what if the Star Falcon race fails again? The Earth emissary challenged Elizabeth. He did not trust anyone at this point. Then, Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. Then I am afraid no one in Stage 14 would be able to defeat them. All we can do is wait for them to move up to the next stages. Allowing them to reach higher stages would only make them stronger along the way. You and I probably wouldn't even stand a chance against them. He shook his head in frustration. Elizabeth, I have no choice but to report to our Emperor. He will report to the Blood Assembly and have the Dark Region deal with them once and for all. The creatures of the Dark Region can only act in the darkness. How do you suppose we lure them into the darkness when they know for a fact that it is dangerous there? Elizabeth asked. Hey, don't worry about that, the emissary chuckled. I have a plan. And your plan is? Elizabeth asked, doubting the emissary a little bit. All you have to do is ask the Star Falcon race to act as planned. If they kill the 2 humans, then good for us. But if they fail, you'll be the first one to know my plan, he replied with a smug look on his face. Meanwhile, in the inner yard of the City Lord's mansion, a black body-strengthening jade was being held safely in Zen's hands. This particular stone could increase one's body strength in a similar way that the soul crystal could improve the souls of light. After entering the other shore, all the wild gods needed such jades to strengthen their bodies. Crack, 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 quote, with only a slight push, Zen put enough pressure on the stone for it to turn into fine black powder. He gently sent it into his elixir field. Within seconds, the substance made its way through the elixir field to Zen's meridians. Less than a minute had passed and it was already distributed evenly across his body. Almost instantly, Zen felt his body grow stronger a bit. If the other shore power had been destroyed or removed, all the creatures in the source world would lose much strength. Zen was not an exception to this. His physical strength had been less than a divine megaton at one point. Even after fusing with the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline, his strength did not improve significantly. Though he was considered to be a big threat to everyone else, his physical strength was still very poor as compared to his other shore power. Master Regal Jade, you said before that I would be unable to refine the body-strengthening jade, Zen said to the Regal Jade spirit in his body, but I just devoured it and everything seems fine. Prior to entering the Desire World, Zen had never actually seen a body-strengthening jade. His first ever encounter with it was in the Iron House inside the Energy Vertex. At that time, the Regal Jade spirit had predicted that Zen wouldn't be able to refine the body-strengthening jade, because his body was not cultivated with the truth of powerful holy body. He proved it wrong by refining the jade quite smoothly into his body. It's a little weird, the Regal Jade spirit thought for a moment and continued, I guess this means that the truth of godly way of your body has a connection with the truth of powerful holy body. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to refine it at all. The Regal Jade spirit couldn't seem to understand it either, but it was probably because the truths of godly ways were hard to understand. Other creatures in the chaos wouldn't understand them clearly either. There were many features of the truths of godly ways. Some of them repelled one another and some had commonalities. At the time Zen went against the evil god, he was able to pour the truth of 3 energy construction into the Imperial Sword Seal. This was because this truth of godly way had something in common with the truth of eternal sword intent. Zen felt great and happy that his strength had been improved. He didn't plan to stop after refining that first body-strengthening jade. Breaking Zen's solitude, Elvinia stepped in and spread out her arms, smiling at him. What do you think? She wore an ocean blue dress that had light green lace detailing at the hem. Her dress was exquisite, beautiful, and at the same time, emitted a tiny bit of energy. You look extraordinary. Was it made by the guide weasel race? Zen asked, appreciating the beauty in front of him. Yes, I didn't expect them to be so good with their hands, she said giddily. The dress was not only powerful, but it put her in a great mood. Zen nodded in agreement. Just then, he picked up another piece of body-strengthening jade and handed it to her. You're here just in time, he said. Try and see if you can refine this jade. As a purified being, Elvinia was physically and mentally strong. However, she still had things to learn, like how to use her power wisely. Zen didn't doubt that she could refine the jade. It seemed that the other shore creatures were able to do it, so it should be nothing to Elvenia. She blinked a couple times and then took the cool-to-touch jade in her hand. Okay, she said, and then turned around and took a seat right next to Zen. All of a sudden, the stone in her hand shone a brilliant light. I forgot to tell you something, she said, looking at Zen intently. What is it? Zen asked. I invited Letitia and Margaret to live in my Phoenix Palace for a while, she replied, trying not to look him in the eye. Zen was stunned upon hearing this.